The wind in that country was not a blessing. It was a thief. It came down off the high red mesas, tasting of iron and distance, stealing the moisture from a man's skin and the hope from his heart. It was the year 1876, though some said it was closer to 1878. Time moved slowly here, measured in seasons of drought rather than the turning of a calendar. This was the strip of land caught between Arizona and New Mexico, a hardpan valley that promised nothing and delivered it. The town was named La Estrella, the Star, which was a bitter piece of humor for a place that offered no guidance. It was a splinter of civilization pressed against the dust. False front buildings lined a single wide street, their paint peeling under a sun that knew no mercy. There was a saloon, a mercantile, a livery stable that smelled of old hay and exasperation, and Elena's boarding house, which was the only clean thing in the valley. The air was thick with tension, a different kind of grit that got in the teeth. It was the tension between the Dine, the Navajo people who had lived on this land since the gods had shaped it, and the new settlers who came west with paper titles and hungry eyes. And now, there was a third shadow, the railroad. It was a rumor snaking its way west, promising progress but demanding water. And in this valley, there was only one water, Clear Spring. It was the lifeblood, the single pulse of life in 10,000 square miles of dry rock. The rains had been poor for 2 years, and the old ones promised the next season would be worse. Whoever controlled Clear Spring controlled the valley, the town, and the path of the railroad. Keldon Yazzie watched the stagecoach arrive. He stood not on the boardwalk, but in the deeper shadow of the livery, his shoulder resting against a support beam. He was a man of the din, the Navajo, but he wore the clothes of the white man-worn denim trousers, a flannel shirt faded by the sun, and boots that had seen too many miles. He was in his early 20s, but the time he had spent scouting for the cavalry had aged his eyes. He had left that life a year prior, disgusted by the orders and the betrayals, and now he lived between the world of his people up near the mesas and the dirty streets of La Estrella. He was a tracker, a rider, and he could put an arrow through a running jackrabbit at 50 yards, a skill that earned him grudging respect and deep suspicion. He did not belong here, but he did not belong anywhere else either. He watched the coach stop in a cloud of alkali dust. The driver looked half dead, wrapped in a linen duster that was the same color as the road. The door swung open, and she stepped out. Her name was May Sullivan, and she was 23 years old. She was not dressed for this country. She wore a dark traveling suit of heavy wool, buttoned high at the throat, and a hat that the wind immediately tried to steal. She had come from a place with green hills and reliable rain, a place she could never return to. She had come west to start a school, a notion that seemed laughable in the face of the saloon's raucous piano. She was intelligent. She was frank. And she carried a secret about her family in Boston, a shame that had pushed her across the continent. She stood by the coach, clutching her single carpet bag, and stared at the town. This was La Estrella. It looked like the end of the world. She saw men in dusty hats watching her from the shade of the saloon porch. She saw a sheriff, a man named Ortega, wiping dust from a badge that seemed to mean very little. Sheriff Ortega was a man trapped. He believed in the law, but he was drowning in debt. And the man who held his paper was the same man who wanted the valley. Ambrose Calder. He was the shadow behind the railroad, the man buying up land and water rights, the man who did not care who he crushed. Calder was not in town today, but his presence was everywhere. It was in the confident swagger of the men drinking whiskey before noon. They were hired guns, locals and imports, and they called themselves the Rattler Gang. They were Calder's teeth. May Sullivan took a breath, tasting the grit. She was here to be a teacher, and perhaps a nurse if needed. She had certification in both. She saw a young boy, maybe 10 years old, sweeping the boardwalk in front of the mercantile with a worn-out broom. His name was Tomas, and he watched her. His dark eyes filled with a desperate curiosity. He wanted to learn to read. He wanted to be more than a boy sweeping dust for pennies. May adjusted her hat. She would start with Elena's boarding house. She needed a room. Then she would find the schoolhouse. Keldon watched her. He saw the determination in the line of her jaw, the way she refused to flinch when the Rattler gang let out a low whistle. She was another white woman come to change them, to teach them. He had seen them come before. They never lasted. The dust and the loneliness always drove them back east. He turned to leave, slipping back toward the corral. His uncle, Dine Biadi, the storyteller of his clan, was waiting for him near the spring. His uncle would laugh at this new arrival. Another complication in a world that was already tilting off its axis. May secured a room from Elena, a kind widow whose face was a map of past sorrows. Elena warned her about the town, about Calder, about keeping to herself. "The sheriff, he tries," Elena said, her voice low as she poured May a glass of water from a clay olla. The water was precious and tasted of earth. "But Ambrose Calder, he owns the bank. He owns the telegraph line, and he wants Clear Spring. He says the railroad needs it, but the spring belongs to the people, to everyone." "What about the Navajo?" May asked, her voice clear in the quiet room. Elena's eyes met hers. "Mr. Calder does not consider them people. Be careful, Miss Sullivan. This is not Boston." "I am aware of that. Thank you," May said, though she was not really. She left the boarding house an hour later, intent on finding the building designated as the school. It was supposed to be at the end of the street, near the abandoned assay office. The sun was high now, a physical weight. The street was quieter, the heat having driven most sensible folk indoors. A large freight wagon, piled high with railroad ties, rumbled down the center of the street, pulled by a 6-mule team. The driver cracked his whip, the sound like a gunshot in the heavy air. A bay gelding tied to the hitching rail outside the saloon had been dozing in the heat. The crack of the whip and the sudden, massive shadow of the wagon startled it. The horse threw its head back, eyes rolling white. It pulled against the rein. A sharp, panicked snap. The worn leather tether broke. The horse was free and terrified. It reared, hooves slicing the air, and spun, landing half on the boardwalk. May Sullivan had stopped to let the wagon pass. She was standing directly in the horse's path, her back to the rough-hewn wall of the mercantile. She had nowhere to go. She raised her hands, her carpet bag dropping to the ground as the animal screamed and lunged, its fear turning to blind panic. She did not see Keldon move. He had been on his way out of town, but he had seen the tether snap. He did not run. He flowed. He moved from the alley like a shadow detaching itself from the wall, his feet silent on the hard-baked earth. He did not shout at the horse. He spoke to it, low and steady, ancient words of the dine for calm and water. The horse shied, turning from the sound, and Keldon caught the broken rein. He did not try to stop the horse's momentum. He used it, turning the animal's panic into a tight circle, his own body a calm anchor in the center of the chaos. He kept speaking, his voice a soft rasp, and the horse, feeling a confident hand rather than a fearful one, began to settle. Its breathing was ragged, its sides slick with sweat, but the terror was fading. It was over in 10 seconds. Keldon stood stroking the horse's neck, his back to the woman, when the gelding was quiet, blowing softly through its nostrils. Keldon turned. May Sullivan was pressed so hard against the wall she looked as if she were trying to merge with the wood. Her face was pale beneath the dust. Her hat had fallen and hung by its ribbons around her neck. She was breathing as hard as the horse. He walked the horse the last few feet and looped the broken rein around the rail, securing it with a knot that would not break. Then he looked at her. It was the first time they had truly seen one another. He saw eyes the color of a cloudy sky, wide with leftover fear but not hysteria. He saw the stubborn set of her mouth. For a heartbeat. She was not a white teacher, not an Easterner. She was just a woman who had been in danger. She saw him, Not just an Indian, a Navajo scout, a shape in the shadows. She saw the intelligence in his dark eyes, the fine line of his cheekbones, the absolute, unsettling competence with which he had moved. He was young, younger than she had first thought, but he seemed rooted in the earth in a way she had never seen before. The moment stretched, suspended in the heat. The town was watching. The men on the saloon porch had stopped talking. Sheriff Ortega had stepped out of his office. The divide, the invisible canyon-wide barrier of race and history, snapped back into place. Keldon touched the brim of a hat he was not wearing, a half-conscious gesture he had picked up from the cavalry. "He is settled now, ma'am," he said. His voice was low, careful. May found her own voice. It came out shaky, but it was firm. "Thank you. You were very quick." "Horses are afraid of noise," he said, as if it were no great thing. He looked at her once more, a long, unreadable assessment. Then he nodded, a curt gesture that was not quite a bow and not quite a dismissal. He turned and walked away. Not back to the livery, but down the alley between the mercantile and the saloon, his pace unhurried. He disappeared into the blinding sunlight and shadows of the back alleys, leaving her alone on the boardwalk. May Sullivan bent down to retrieve her carpet bag. Her hands were shaking. She brushed the red dust from the fabric, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had come west to teach children and escape her past, but she understood, standing there in the suffocating heat, that she had just met the two forces that truly defined this land: a sudden, senseless violence and a quiet, watchful strength. The schoolhouse was a joke. It was a lean-to of warped pine and sod, standing at the far end of La Estrella's dusty street, where the town gave way to the open, arid land that stretched toward Clear Spring. May Sullivan stood before it, her hands on her hips, looking at the broken door and the windows empty of glass. The wind blew straight through it, carrying the scent of juniper and defeat. This was her classroom. She had been in town for 3 days, long enough for the initial shock to wear off and a simmering anger to take its place. She had paid for her room at Elena's boarding house for 2 months in advance, a commitment that had exhausted most of her funds. She would make this work. She would sweep out the snakes and patch the roof. She was measuring the window frame with her hands when she heard the voices. They were not from the town. They were raised in anger, coming from the direction of the spring, which was hidden from view by a low rise of sandstone. She heard a man's voice, rough and mocking. "This ain't your pasture no more. Calder's orders. The railroad needs this water. Take your sheep and get—" May felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She dropped her hands and walked around the dilapidated school, climbing the small rise. Below her, nestled in a green crease in the red rock, was Clear Spring. It was not large, but it was beautiful. A pool of impossible turquoise fringed with cottonwoods. 3 dine women were there, their bright skirts vivid against the earth. They had been filling water jugs. Their flock of sheep, perhaps 30 animals, grazed nearby. Blocking their path back to the mesas were 4 men on horseback. She recognized them from the saloon, the Rattler gang. They lounged in their saddles, their rifles held casually across their laps. One man, burly and bearded, had dismounted and kicked over one of the clay water jugs, the dark stain of precious water disappearing instantly into the dust. One of the women, an elder with a face like carved mahogany, spoke to him in her own language, her voice sharp and defiant. The bearded man laughed. "I don't speak savage, old woman. I said, get, or we'll build our dam right on top of your sheep." May did not think. She acted. She was halfway down the slope before her mind caught up with her feet. "Stop this!" she called out. Her voice was clear and carried in the dry air. The 4 men turned, surprised. They had not seen her. The bearded man squinted, then grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Well, look here, boys. It's the schoolmarm. Come to give us a lesson." May stopped a safe distance away, her hands clenched at her sides. This land, by the Treaty of 1868, is designated for shared use. You have no right to deny them access to this water." The man's grin widened. He looked back at his friends. "She's read a book. Boys, a treaty. That's real nice." He spat a stream of tobacco juice near her feet. "That's paper, Miss Sullivan. This," he patted the stock of his rifle, "is law. This is Calder's land now, and he aims to build a dam to divert this spring for the steam engines. So you and these," he gestured dismissively at the women, "can go thirsty." "You are breaking the law," May insisted, though her heart was hammering. "Ma'am, the only law out here is the one that's paid for. Now, I'd hate to see a nice lady like you get heat stroke. Best run on back to your boarding house." He took a menacing step toward her. May held her ground, but the fear was real. The women were silent, watching her. "That's enough. Jeb!" The voice came from the town. Sheriff Ortega was walking toward them, his hand not on his gun, but adjusting his belt. He looked tired. The man named Jeb stopped. He did not look afraid, merely annoyed. "Just doing my job. Sheriff, Mr. Calder wants this area cleared." "And I want the peace kept," Ortega said. He looked at May, his expression pleading with her to be silent. "Miss Sullivan, this is a property dispute, not your concern." "It is everyone's concern," May said hotly. "He kicked over their water." "A misunderstanding," Ortega said, his eyes sliding away from hers. "Jeb, you've made your point. Ride on out. Let them go." Jeb grunted. He swung back into his saddle. "Calder ain't gonna like this. He's bringing civilization. Sheriff, you're delaying it." He and his men turned their horses, not quickly, but with a deliberate, insolent slowness, and rode back toward the saloon. May hurried to the women, helping the eldest one to her feet. The woman looked at May, her dark eyes unreadable. She said nothing, no word of thanks. She simply gathered her remaining jugs, called to her flock, and, with the other two women, began the long walk toward the mesas. They did not look back. May turned to Ortega. "You let them go. You just let them ride away after threatening those women." Ortega sighed, wiping the dust from his face. "Miss Sullivan, you are new here. You do not understand the way things are. Ambrose Calder is bringing the railroad to La Estrella. That means jobs. It means a future. It means this town won't dry up and blow away. And in exchange, he gets to steal water and terrorize people." "He owns the paper on half this town, including my office," Ortega said, his voice dropping to a low, bitter murmur. "He says the railroad needs the water. He says progress requires sacrifice. I am one man. I am advising you, for your own safety, to stay out of it. Teach your alphabet. Let the world be." He turned and walked back to the town. His shoulders slumped. May stood alone by the spring, watching the water well up from the rock, pure and indifferent. The town was divided. She had seen it in the mercantile, heard it in Elena's kitchen. Half the townsfolk were terrified of Calder, the other half eager for the money he promised. The law was a hollow badge. If the law would not help, she would have to find another way. She knew who she had to find. She found Keldon Yazzie in the livery stable, not mending a saddle, but braiding a rope of horsehair, his fingers moving with a quick, practiced rhythm. He did not look up when she entered. The stable smelled of hay and dry leather. "Mr. Yazzie," she said. He continued his work. "Ma'am, I need to hire you as a guide." "I am not for hire," he said, his voice flat. He did not like her. He saw her as part of the problem, another white face demanding things. "This is not for money," she said, moving closer. "I need you to take me to your village. I must speak with your elders. I want to talk about Clear Spring." He stopped braiding. He looked up, and his eyes were cold. "Talk. That is all you people do. You talk, and then you take... You want to go tell my uncle that the railroad is progress. You want to teach him how to accept being thirsty." His scorn hit her like a slap. "No," she said, her own anger rising. "I want to listen. I saw what Calder's men did at the spring. I went to the sheriff. He did nothing. He is afraid of Calder." Keldon watched her, his expression unreadable. He saw the passion in her face, the way her hands were clenched. He had heard about the confrontation. News traveled fast in the valley. "I want to help," she said. "Help is a dangerous word," he said, returning to his rope. "Last time a white woman came to help. She tried to take our children to a boarding school in Santa Fe to wash the dine out of them. I am not that woman. I am a teacher, and I am a nurse. I brought books, and I brought quinine and bandages. But I cannot fight Ambrose Calder if I do not understand what he is fighting against. Please, take me to your uncle." He studied her for a long time. The silence stretched, filled only by the stamp of a horse in a stall. He was testing her, waiting to see if she would fill the silence with nervous chatter. She did not. She stood and met his gaze, unflinching. "I will take you," he said at last, setting the rope aside. "On one condition. Name it. When we get there, you will not speak. You will not offer your plans. You will not tell us about your laws or your treaties. You will sit, and you will listen to Dine Biadi. He is my uncle, the storyteller. You will hear his story from its beginning to its end. Only then, if he asks, will you speak? Do you agree to this?" It was not what she had expected. He was asking her to be silent, the one thing she was not good at. But she saw the fierce, protective intelligence in his eyes. He was not a savage. He was a guardian. "I agree," she said. "Be at the edge of town by the schoolhouse, at dawn," he said. "And do not wear that dress. This is not a Boston park. The brush will tear it to ribbons." The ride was silent. Keldon moved ahead of her on his buckskin pony, leading her small mule up a trail she could not have found in 1,000 years. It was barely a path, a whisper through the canyons and the mesquite. He moved like a part of the land itself. May, wearing a sturdy split skirt she had packed, was grimly determined to keep up. After an hour, the land opened into a high valley, sheltered by the great red arms of the mesa. It was not a village, not as she understood it. It was a collection of family dwellings, solid structures of earth and wood, spaced far apart. Smoke rose from their centers. Sheep grazed peacefully on the sparse grass. And there, at the head of the valley, was the source of clear spring, bubbling from the rock before it ran down toward the town. Keldon stopped at the home of his uncle. Dine Biadi was sitting outside, weaving at a large loom. He was an old man, but his back was straight, his hands steady. He looked at May with eyes that seemed to hold the entire history of the valley. Keldon spoke to him in their language, his voice softer, more respectful. The old man nodded and gestured to a log bench near the loom. May sat. She honored her promise. Keldon stood near the spring, his arms crossed, watching her. For a long time, the only sound was the thump-thump of the old man's weaving baton. Then, he began to speak, his English slow and careful, as if he were pulling each word from the earth. He told her the story of the spring. He told her how the first people had emerged into this world and how the holy ones had blessed this spot with water. He told her of the long walk, the great suffering when the soldiers had marched his people hundreds of miles east, and how they had nearly died of thirst and starvation. And he told her of the return, when they had come back to this land, broken but not beaten, and found the spring still flowing. "This water is not a thing to be owned," Dine Biadi said, his eyes on the horizon. "It is not a resource for a steam engine. It is the blood of our grandmothers. It is our memory. When we drink their stories. If Mr. Calder builds his dam, he does not just kill our sheep. He kills our memory. He kills our gods." May listened. She heard the truth in his voice, a truth that no treaty, no law could ever contain. This was not about property. It was about life. When he finished, the sun was high. He looked at her, You have been quiet, schoolteacher. You have listened. Now, you may speak. May found her voice was thick with emotion. I have nothing to say that is as important as what you have told me, but your story must be heard, not just by me. She pulled a small, leather-bound notebook and a pencil from her bag. May I write this down? I will send it to the county judge. I will send it to the newspapers back in the East. They will hear your words. The old man nodded slowly. Write it down. Words are good. Words are medicine. May wrote, her pencil flying across the page, capturing the history of the spring. Keldon watched her, a strange new respect dawning in his eyes. She had kept her word. Night fell quickly. The meeting had taken all day, and a return to La Estrella in the dark was too dangerous. Keldon's family offered her a small, clean dwelling to sleep in. She ate fresh cornbread and mutton stew, and for the first time since arriving, she felt she was in the right place. The attack came near midnight. It was not a raid. It was stealth. A single shout woke the camp. May ran outside, pulling her shawl around her. At the far edge of the settlement, away from the dwellings but close to the grazing lands, a large shade structure was burning. It was the community's winter storehouse. Flames licked into the black sky, devouring a season's worth of dried corn, beans, and wool. The men ran with buckets, but it was hopeless. The fire was too hot, the structure too dry. May stood beside Keldon, her heart sick. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Keldon was not watching the fire. His face was a mask of cold fury. He moved away from the light, his eyes scanning the perimeter, reading the ground. He knelt by a clump of juniper, hidden in the shadows. May followed him. He was staring at the earth. There, pressed deep into the soft dust, was a boot print. It was a town boot, with a high heel, not a moccasin, and the heel had a strange, worn groove in it, like a backward letter R. The Rattler Gang, Keldon said, his voice a low growl. Jeb's boot. He stood up and looked at the fire, which was already collapsing into a column of sparks. This was not a warning. This was to starve us out, to force us to leave the spring before winter comes. He turned to May, his eyes catching the terrible light of the fire. This is not a dispute anymore. It is a war. May was shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage. She thought of the women at the spring, of Dine Bia Adi's story, of the food turning to ash. Keldon looked at her, his expression hard. You see now, schoolmarm, this is what you wanted to help. You should go. Take the stagecoach tomorrow. Go back to Boston. This is not your fight. Other teachers came before me, May said, her voice quiet but shaking with intensity. Elena told me they left. They left because it was too hard, or too lonely, or because of the dust. She looked at the smoldering ruins of the storehouse, then back at him. I will not be the teacher who leaves because she is a coward. They burned the food. They are stealing the water. They have shown their hand. She took a breath, the smoke stinging her lungs. I accept the cost. Mr. Yazzie, you told me they would ruin my name. Let them try. She stepped closer to him, her eyes meeting his in the flickering light. You know this land. I know their laws. Tell me, how do we fight back? Keldon stared at her for a long moment. The woman who had been afraid of a spooked horse was gone. In her place was someone he did not recognize, someone with soot on her cheek and iron in her spine. He gave a single, slow nod. They used fire, he said. We will use your words, the ones you wrote for the judge, and we will use my knowledge of the land. We must be faster than they are. The fire at the Dine camp had burned more than just their winter stores. It had burned away the last of May Sullivan's naivety. She returned to La Estrella with Keldon at her side, the smell of soot on her clothes and a cold, hard purpose in her heart. She was no longer a hopeful teacher seeking a quiet place to start over. She was a witness. She took her meals in her room at Elena's boarding house, Elena, her face etched with worry, brought her trays of broth and bread. "They are talking about you." "May," Elena warned, her voice barely a whisper. She set the tray down. "In the saloon. The Rattler gang. They say you spent the night up on the mesa." Her eyes were kind but fearful. "They are saying you are the Indians' woman. It is not safe. The women of the town. They will shun you." "Let them," May said. She was at her small writing desk, her back straight. "Words are only wind, but a petition is paper. It is law." She was drafting 2 documents. The first was the letter to the county judge, the one Sheriff Ortega had dismissed. She wrote it again, her pen scratching furiously. She wove the words of Dinibiadi into the legal language of the treaty. She described the stolen water, the threats, and the column of smoke from the burned storehouse. She called it arson. She called it attempted starvation. The second document was simpler. It was a petition for the citizens of La Estrella. It stated that Clear Spring was a public resource, vital to the survival of the entire valley, and that any attempt by a private entity, namely Ambrose Calder, to seize or divert it was an act of aggression against the entire community. She would get signatures. She would show the sheriff that he was not the only law. Her first stop was the mercantile. The proprietor, a man who had seemed kind, was sorting beans. He saw her enter and his face tightened. "Miss Sullivan," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I have a petition, sir," she said, her voice strong. "It concerns Clear Spring. We are asking that it remain public." He shook his head. "Scooping beans into a sack. I cannot sign that. I have my freight to think of. Mr. Calder's railroad is bringing in my supplies. I cannot afford to be on his bad side." "If he seizes the spring, he will be everyone's bad side," she argued. "That is his business, not mine." She left the store, the man's rejection cold on her skin. She tried the blacksmith. He was shoeing a horse, the air thick with the smell of hot iron. He listened, his face grim, and then shook his head. "The Rattlers watered their horses here this morning. Miss," he said, his voice low. "They mentioned you. They said you were stirring up the natives. I have a wife and 2 small children." He turned back to the horse's hoof. "I cannot." She went from shop to shop, door to door. The answer was the same. Fear, thick and stifling as the dust, had settled over La Estrella. The promise of Calder's money had bought the silence of the hopeful, and the threat of the Rattler gang had bought the silence of the rest. And the slander Elena had warned her of had taken root. As May crossed the street toward the church, she saw the minister's wife on the porch, the woman who had invited her to tea only a week before, stared at her, then deliberately turned and went inside, shutting the door with a final, echoing click. She was isolated. She was the woman who had spent the night with the savages. She returned to the main street, her petition unsigned, her face burning. She would not be silenced. If they would not sign her paper, they would see her words. She returned to her room, mixed a small pot of flour and water into a paste, and hand-lettered a large sheet of paper. It read, "Town meeting. Tonight, 7 o'clock. To discuss the future of Clear Spring. All are welcome." She marched directly to the notice board outside the sheriff's office. It was the center of the town. No one could miss it. The street was quiet, baking in the midday sun. The men on the saloon porch were watching her, their laughter a low murmur. She ignored them. She began to brush the paste onto the back of her sign. A sound like a sharp, dry crack split the air. A splinter of wood, the size of her finger, exploded from the post, just inches from her right hand. The paste pot flew from her grasp and shattered on the boardwalk. May froze. Her ears rang. She stared at the new white scar in the wood, unable to move, unable to breathe. A second crack. The bullet kicked up a cloud of red dust at the hem of her skirt. She was going to die. A hand, hard as iron, clamped around her upper arm. She was yanked off her feet, pulled from the light and into the darkness. It was Keldon. He had come from the alley beside the sheriff's office, moving like a shadow. He dragged her into the narrow, suffocating space between the two buildings, a gap perhaps 3 feet wide, filled with shadows and the smell of old trash. He did not release her. He shoved her deep against the back wall, his body covering hers, pressing her into the rough pine. His arm was braced over her head, his chest hard against her shoulder and side. She was surrounded by him. "Stay still," he whispered. His voice was not a comfort, it was a command, a low vibration that she felt in her bones. He was not looking at her. His head was turned, his eyes narrowed, scanning the rooftops and high windows of the buildings across the street. He was utterly calm. May was shaking violently. Her cheek was pressed against the rough fabric of his shirt. It smelled of sage and dust, a clean, wild scent, completely unlike the saloon stench of stale whiskey and sweat. She could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart against her ribs. She was crushed between the unyielding wall and his unyielding body, and for the first time since the shot, her terror began to recede. He was a shield. "He shot at me," she whispered, the words trembling. "A warning," Keldon replied, his voice still low, his eyes still scanning. He aimed for the post. "Then your feet. He was telling you to stop. The next one will be aimed higher." They stood there in the stifling, close darkness. A full minute passed. May was aware of every line of his body pressed against hers, the strength in the arm above her head, the solid weight of his shoulder. It was the most intimate she had been with any man, an intimacy born of pure survival. "He is gone," Keldon said at last. He relaxed his arm but did not step away immediately. He looked down at her, his face shadowed. "Your paper words are more dangerous than you know. Schoolmarm, you wave a red flag at a bull." "It is all I have," she said, her voice small. She pushed a stray strand of hair from her face, her hand still unsteady. "It is not enough." He eased back, creating a space between them. The alley felt suddenly cold and empty. He looked out at the street, his eyes tracking everything. "Go back to Elena's. Use the back door. Do not come out again today." "I have to see the sheriff," she said, her anger returning. "He shot at me, in front of his office." Keldon gave a short, bitter laugh. "The sheriff saw. He is inside. He is waiting for you to go away." But May was already moving. She pushed past him, emerging into the blinding sunlight, and stormed through the door of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Ortega was sitting at his desk, carefully writing in a ledger. He did not look up. "Did you hear that?" May demanded, her voice shaking with fury. She slammed her hands on his desk. "Someone just tried to kill me, right outside your door. 2 shots. Ortega blotted his ink carefully. "I heard some noise. Miss Sullivan." Sounded like a wagon backfiring. "You are upsetting yourself over nothing." "Nothing." She pointed to the door. "There are splinters in the notice board. There is a bullet hole in the dust where I was standing. Are you blind? Or just a coward?" That made him look up. His face was sallow, his eyes hunted. "You will watch your tongue. Miss, I have told you, you are the one causing the trouble. You are agitating the dine. You are trying to stop progress. The good people of this town want that railroad. The good people of this town do not want to be murdered for it." She was so angry she could barely think. She pulled the folded, twice-written letter to the judge from her pocket. "I am done with this. I am done with you. I am giving this to the stage driver. It is addressed to the county judge. It details the arson at the dine camp, the intimidation at the spring, and now this attempted murder. Let us see what a real lawman does with it." She turned to leave. "I cannot let you send that." Ortega's voice was dead. She stopped and turned back to him. "What did you say?" "That letter. It is evidence. I am confiscating it." He stood up and held out his hand. May laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "Evidence? You just told me it was a wagon backfiring. You will not touch this." "Give it to me. Miss Sullivan." He moved between her and the door. He was a small man, but he was desperate. And he was wearing a gun. You are interfering in an official investigation. You are a liar. You are not investigating anything. You are covering for them. You do not understand what is at stake, he hissed, his face close to hers. Calder holds the note on this building. He holds the note on my house. He pays my salary. He is this town. Without him, we are nothing, just dust. He owns you, May whispered, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. He bought you. He bought your badge. Ortega flinched, as if she had struck him. I have a family. I am trying to protect this town from tearing itself apart. Your letter is full of lies and Navajo stories. It will only make things worse. There is no proof. He snatched the letter from her hand. The paper tore, but he did not care. He walked to his desk, unlocked a drawer, and threw the letter inside. He locked the drawer and put the key in his pocket. Now, get out, he said, his voice trembling. Get out of my office and stop this, or I will arrest you for incitement. You are alone. Miss Sullivan, you have no one. May looked at the locked drawer, then at the man who had sworn to uphold the law. The betrayal was so deep it left her breathless. She turned, without another word, and walked out into the hostile street. She did not go back to Elena's. She walked, numb, to the one place that felt like hers, the ruined schoolhouse. She sat on the dirt floor, her back against the warped wall. And for the first time since arriving, she put her head in her hands and cried. They were tears of pure, hot rage. She did not hear Keldon enter. He was just suddenly there, squatting in the doorway, blocking the light. She looked up, wiping her face angrily. He took it, she said, her voice thick. Sheriff Ortega, he stole my letter. He locked it in his desk. He said I have no proof. Keldon nodded slowly. He had expected this. His law is broken. Calder's law is the only one in La Estrella. So what do we do? She asked, her voice raw. What is left? We wait for them to make the next move, he said. The silence in the small building was heavy. To fill it, Keldon reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a rolled piece of smoked hide. He spread it on the ground. It was a map, but not like any May had ever seen. It was not drawn with straight lines and names. It was a map of pictures, of stories. It showed the mesas as sleeping giants, the streams as snakes, the springs as bright, open eyes. As he was explaining a line of symbols, a small shadow fell in the doorway. It was Tomas, the boy from the mercantile. His eyes were wide with hero worship for Keldon. Mr. Keldon, he asked, his voice shy, are you teaching? Keldon's face softened, a rare, small smile touching his lips. I am. Thomas, come. I am showing Miss Sullivan how the land breathes. May, grateful for the distraction, for the chance to do the one thing she came here for, sat up. Tomas, can you read your letters? We can practice. For an hour, the three of them sat on the dirt floor. May drew letters in the dust, and Thomas copied them. Keldon added to his map, drawing a new line with a piece of charcoal. This, he said, pointing to a narrow, twisting line between two towering cliffs, is Eagle's Slot. It is a secret way, a shortcut. It leads from the high rocks, where the eagles nest, down to the grove of cottonwoods just behind Clear Spring. Our people use it when the valley is watched. It is a good path, if you are not afraid of heights. Thomas's eyes were glued to the map, a secret way. Later, as the sun began to set, Thomas was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the saloon, as he did every evening for a few pennies. The door swung open and Jeb, the leader of the Rattler gang, stepped out. Hey, kid, Jeb said, his voice friendly. He held up a coin. It shone in the lamplight, a full silver $1. Thomas's eyes went wide. He had never held that much money. Sir, you like Mr. Keldon? Do you not? Jeb asked, leaning against a post. Yes, sir. He's teaching me. I saw him showing you a map today, on a piece of old leather. Tomas nodded, suddenly nervous. "Well, I need to see that map," Jeb said, flipping the coin. "It is not for me. It is for Mr. Calder. He is planning a big celebration for the town. Fireworks, a big barbecue. He needs that map to find the best, flattest place for the party. That is all. You just borrow it for me. Tonight, bring it to me, and I will give it right back to you in the morning. He will never know it was gone, and this dollar is yours." I cannot steal from Mr. Keldon," Tomas stammered. "It is not stealing. Kid, it is helping. You want to help the town, do you not? You want to be part of the celebration." Jeb's voice was smooth, persuasive. A celebration, fireworks. It sounded wonderful. "He will give it back?" Tomas asked. "My word," Jeb said, spitting. He held out the dollar. Thomas looked at the coin. It meant shoes. It meant food for his mother. He took it. Early the next morning, Keldon went to the schoolhouse. He planned to track a mountain lion that had been seen near the sheep. He did not want to carry the map. He hid it under a loose floorboard in the corner, a place he thought was safe, and left. Tomas, who had been watching from the alley, slipped inside. His hands were shaking. He lifted the board. The map was there. He grabbed it, his heart pounding, and ran to the back of the saloon. Jeb was waiting. He snatched the map and unrolled it, a slow, ugly grin spreading across his face. He handed Tomas the dollar. "Good boy. Now get out of here, and forget you saw me." Tomas ran, the coin heavy in his pocket. Jeb stared at the map. Well, he murmured. He traced the line of the eagle slot with a dirty finger. "Fireworks. That is right. We are going to light a fire. All right. A back door straight to the spring." He laughed and motioned to his men. "Saddle up. We are going for a ride in the high rocks." When Keldon returned, the sun was low. He knew something was wrong before he even entered the schoolhouse. The air was different. He lifted the floorboard. The map was gone. He saw the small, scuffed footprints in the dust. Tomas. He followed the trail, his face like stone. He found Thomas behind the mercantile, crying, holding the silver dollar. It did not take long to get the story. Keldon did not yell. His quiet, cold fury was worse. He took the silver dollar from the boy's hand and threw it as far as he could into the mesquite. "That is the price of your home. Tomas," he said, his voice flat. "That is what you sold us for." He left the boy sobbing and went to find May. She was at the spring, washing her face, the only place she felt clean. He told her, his voice choked with self-loathing. "He has my map, the one I drew for my people. It shows the eagle slot, a way to get to the spring without being seen. They will use it. My knowledge. He is using my knowledge to destroy us." May saw the despair in his eyes. She put her hand on his arm, her touch light but firm. "It is not your fault. Keldon, you were teaching. He tricked a child. That is his sin, not yours. We will stop them." "How?" he asked. "They are already riding. They have seen the path. It is too late." He mounted his pony and rode, not to the town, but to the high mesa, to his uncle. He found Adi at his loom. Keldon stood before him, a warrior stripped of his weapons, and told him everything. The fire, the failed petition, the sheriff's betrayal, and now, the map. Adi stopped weaving. The silence was absolute. "My son," the old man said, his eyes on the distant, purple shadows, "you have lived your life between the worlds. You wore the blue coat of the soldiers, and then you wore the denim of the settlers. You speak their tongue, but you have always stood apart. You watched. You thought that watching was the same as being safe." He looked at Keldon. "You see now, there is no apart. The iron snake will come. The dam will be built. Your map is gone. Standing on the outside only means you lose everything." "What must I do?" Uncle Keldon's voice was raw. "You must choose a shore," the old man said, his voice gentle but iron. "You cannot swim in the middle of the river forever. You will drown. Choose your land." Keldon looked out over the valley. He saw the dirty smudge of La Estrella. He saw the bright, vital green of Clear Spring. He thought of May's pale, determined face, her hand on his arm. He thought of the bullet hole in the post. He straightened his back. The old, weary caution of the scout fell away, replaced by something harder. "I choose," he said. "I stand with the water." "Then you must also stand with the woman," his uncle said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She is the only other person in that town who also stands with the water. Her words are not enough. Your skill is not enough. But together, perhaps." Keldon did not wait. He rode back down the twisting path. He found May at the ruined schoolhouse, packing her small bag of medical supplies. She looked up as he entered. "They are moving," he said. His voice was different. The hesitation was gone. "They are in the high rocks. They will use the eagle slot to get to the spring. I think they will use dynamite to block the spring, to divert it for good. We cannot stop them from the valley. We have to go after them. Now." May's heart leaped. "How?" "We will use the same path they are using, but we know it better than they do. We can cut them off. If we are fast, we can get the map, and we can stop them." She looked at him, at the new certainty in his eyes. "We," she asked. "You and I," he said. "It seems we are the only two left." They did not wait for the sun. To wait was to surrender the spring. Keldon moved with a silent, fluid urgency that pulled May Sullivan along in his wake. They left La Estrella not by the main road, but by a narrow sheep track that wound up into the high, broken country, the mesas rising around them like the walls of a fortress. They were not equals in this land. May was a creature of sidewalks and gas lamps. He was a part of the rock and the wind. She realized this with every step her mule took, stumbling on the loose scree. Keldon, ahead of her on his buckskin pony, seemed to take no notice of the terrain. He was not riding, he was reading. His head was up, his eyes scanning not just the ground but the ridges, the sky, the movement of the hawks high above. "They are 4 men," he said, not looking back at her. His voice was quiet, carrying in the still, pre-dawn air. "They are riding shod horses. The animals are heavy, carrying supplies. They are moving slow. They are arrogant." May squinted. She saw nothing but rocks. "How do you know?" He pointed, not at the ground, but at a branch of juniper 20 feet up the slope. "That branch, it is broken, snagged on a high pack. A Daine would have seen it, would have moved his animal around it. A white man just pushes through." He dismounted, his movement a single, seamless drop to the earth. He knelt. May joined him, her legs stiff. "Here," he said, touching the ground. It looked like any other patch of red dust to her. He blew gently, clearing the fine alkali powder. Underneath was a print. It was a man's boot, the same one he had seen by the burned storehouse, the heel with the worn R. "He is walking," Keldon said. He dismounted to rest his horse. "The print is deep, facing the valley." He was looking back, checking if he was followed. "He is nervous, but not scared." "And the others?" Keldon gestured. "Their tracks are all around. They are clumsy. They do not know this land. They are following my map." The bitterness in his voice was like acid. "They are following my knowledge. They are walking into a trap, but they do not know it. They are the trap." He rose and they moved on, climbing higher, the air growing thinner and colder. The sun finally broke over the eastern rim, setting the canyons on fire. It was beautiful, and it was terrible. They reached the mouth of the eagle slot an hour after sunrise. It was not a canyon. It was a crack in the world. The sandstone walls rose hundreds of feet straight up, and the opening was no wider than a freight wagon. It was a dark, twisting cut in the rock, its path hidden in shadow. Keldon dismounted. "We walk from here. The animals will make too much noise. Tie yours here, with mine. Give them water. We may be gone a long time." May obeyed. her hands feeling thick and clumsy as she fumbled with the reins. Keldon had already unbound a leather thong from his saddle and was tying back his long, black hair. He checked the revolver at his hip, the one she had seen him wear in town. He carried no rifle. A rifle was useless in a place this narrow. He had his knife and the gun. He looked at her. "Stay behind me. Do exactly as I do. When I stop, you stop. When I breathe, you breathe. And do not speak." He slipped into the darkness of the slot. May followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. The sunlight did not reach the canyon floor. The walls were smooth, sculpted by wind and water, and so close that May could touch both sides with her outstretched hands. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of her own breathing, which seemed impossibly loud. They moved for 10 minutes, the passage twisting. Then Keldon stopped. He did not turn. He simply froze, his body rigid. He raised one hand, palm back, ordering her to halt. May stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She could see nothing. Keldon sank into a low crouch, his eyes fixed on the sand floor 20 feet ahead. He was as still as the rock around him. He leaned his head, listening, not with his ears, but with his whole body. May could feel the tension coming off him in waves. "What is it?" she whispered, violating his order. He ignored her. He slowly, infinitely slowly, reached for the knife at his belt. He drew it, the blade dull in the gloom. He did not move forward. He began to edge his way up the canyon wall, his fingers and the toes of his boots finding invisible holds in the rock. He moved up 4 feet until he was above the canyon floor and began to move forward, clinging to the wall like a spider. He was directly above the spot he had been staring at. He looked down, then pointed with his knife. May squinted. She saw it, a piece of metal, a small, dark loop, almost completely buried in the sand, and leading from it, a wire, thin as a hair, stretched taut across the path, anchored to a small hole in the opposite wall. It was set at ankle height. A tripwire. Keldon looked back at her. His face was a mask of concentration. He mouthed one word. "Gun." He moved past the wire, still clinging to the wall, and dropped silently back to the sand. He knelt, his back to her, and began to dig in the sand with his knife, his movements precise, like a surgeon's. He was following the wire. He uncovered a length of it, then a mechanism. It was a shotgun, a short-barreled scattergun, loaded and cocked, wrapped in oilcloth and buried. The trigger was attached to the wire. One kick, one stumble, and it would have fired a blast of buckshot at the legs of whoever was following. It would not have killed, but it would have crippled, and the sound would have echoed up the canyon, a dinner bell for the rattlers. Keldon's hands were steady. He did not cut the wire. That could have triggered a badly set sear. He worked at the mechanism itself, his knife blade slipping between the hammer and the frame, carefully, patiently, until May heard a small, metallic snick. He had disarmed it. He stood up, pulling the shotgun from the sand. He looked at it, his face filled with a cold disgust. Then he broke it open and emptied the shells onto the ground. He threw the useless gun against the wall, where it clattered and fell silent. He turned to May. Her back was pressed so hard against the sandstone she was trying to become part of it. She was breathing in short, shallow gasps. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice a low rasp. "Slow, like you are sleeping." She nodded, her eyes wide, and forced herself to take a long, shuddering breath. "You see," he said, his voice flat. "This is not a dispute. This is a hunt. They left this for us, or for anyone. They do not care." He started walking again. May followed, her knees weak, but her mind sharp. She had learned. She learned to breathe slowly. She learned to place her feet where he placed his. She learned to read the silence. The canyon narrowed again. In some places, They had to turn sideways to squeeze through. May felt the rock pressing against her chest and her back, cold and unyielding. Claustrophobia, a word she had only read in books, became a physical weight in her throat. She stopped, unable to move. "I cannot," she whispered, her voice tight. "It is too small." Keldon stopped and looked back. He did not offer sympathy. He offered reality. "The rattlers are ahead of us. The trap is behind us. The only way is forward. Breathe. Schoolmarm, the rock is just rock. It does not hate you. It does not care. You must move." She closed her eyes, took a breath, and slid her body through the gap. They found a place to rest an hour later, a small, high ledge where a sliver of sun fell. They were both breathing hard. May sank to the ground, her arms and legs aching. Keldon stood watch, but he was more relaxed. "They believe they are safe. They will not set another trap so soon." May looked at the canyon wall. Where the sun hit it, it was covered in carvings. Faint shapes pecked into the dark desert varnish. There were men with shields, animals with long horns, and everywhere, spirals and zigzag lines. "Who made these?" she asked, grateful for the chance to speak. "The ones who came before." Keldon said. He touched one of the spirals. "The Dain did not make these. These are from the Anasazi, the ancient ones. They lived here when the world was new. Then they left." He pointed to a shape that looked like a stick figure with antennae. "This is Spider-Woman. She weaves the world. She sits at the center of her web, and she feels every tremor. She taught our grandmothers how to weave, how to make blankets that hold the pattern of the world, how to make a home from the thread of your own body." He touched the zigzag. "Rain, and the steps are the clouds. My uncle says we do not pray for rain. We pray with it. The pattern must be complete. The song, the pollen, the rain, they are all one thing." May listened, fascinated. This was not the dry, dusty superstition she had been warned about. This was poetry, deep and old. She thought of her own world, the books she had carried all the way from Boston, wrapped in oilcloth in her trunk. "I know a poem," she said, her voice soft, "about a spider." Keldon looked at her, surprised. She recited the lines, her voice echoing slightly in the stone chamber. "A noiseless, patient spider. I marked where on a little promontory it stood isolated, marked how to explore the vacant vast surrounding. It launched forth filament, 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 out of itself, ever unreeling them, ever tirelessly speeding so." She stopped, her face flushing. "It is by a man named Whitman." Keldon was silent for a long moment, considering the words. "Your spider is alone," he said finally. "Ours is a grandmother, at the center of her family. But they are both the same. They both make a new world from nothing. They both weave." The connection hung in the air between them. Two worlds, two stories, touching in a crack in the rock. The sun was past its zenith when Keldon stopped again. "We cannot go on. The slot opens up ahead. It is a box canyon. We will be visible. We wait for dark." They found a high alcove, a shallow cave worn into the sandstone, defensible and hidden. There would be no fire. A fire was a signal, a target. As the shadows deepened and the cold of the high desert crept into their bones, Keldon untied a pouch from his belt. He offered it to her. Inside were flat, hard cakes of blue corn, cooked with ash. May took one. It was dry, but it was food. She had some hardtack biscuits in her pocket, and she offered him one. They sat, 2 feet apart, sharing their sparse meal in silence. The light faded. The stars that emerged were not the polite, distant stars of Boston. They were brilliant, cold diamonds, blazing in a black sky. Keldon looked at May. Her face was pale in the starlight, smudged with dirt. "You have no weapon," he stated. "I had a letter," she said bitterly, "and a petition. They were taken from me." "Paper will not stop a bullet." He made a decision. He unbuckled his gun belt and slid the heavy revolver from its holster. It was an old army Colt, heavy and well-oiled. He handed it to her. "Butt first." May stared at it. It was the ugliest thing she had ever seen. I do not know how." "You will learn," he said, his voice flat. "This is the only language Ambrose Calder and his men speak. Take it." She took the gun. The weight of it shocked her. A solid, deadly weight. It was cold. "It is loaded," he said. "All 6. Do not touch the trigger until you are ready to fire. The hammer is heavy." He showed her how to pull it back with her thumb. The loud, ominous click-click of the mechanism. "When you fire it," he said, his voice low and patient, "it will kick. It will feel like it is trying to break your wrist. Do not let it. Hold it with both hands. Use your left hand to hold your right wrist steady. Brace yourself. Squeeze the trigger. Slow and steady. Do not jerk it. Squeeze it, like you are squeezing water from a stone. Aim for the center of the man. Do not try to be fancy." His hand covered hers on the grip, adjusting her fingers. His touch was rough, calloused, but it was not unkind. It was the touch of a teacher, precise and demanding. "You must be willing," he said, his dark eyes searching hers in the gloom. "If you are not willing to use it, it is just a piece of heavy iron. It will get you killed. Are you willing, schoolmarm?" May looked at the gun, then at him. She thought of the bullet splintering the post by her hand. She thought of the burned storehouse. She thought of Dinebi Adi's words. "Yes," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I am." "Good." He took the gun back and slid it into her skirt pocket. "Do not use it until I tell you." Dawn came, gray and cold. Keldon was moving before the first light. They crept forward, to the end of the slot. The canyon opened into a small, wooded bowl, thick with cottonwoods, the green that signaled the presence of clear spring, just over the next rise. Keldon smelled it first, wood smoke and tobacco. He motioned May down, behind a large boulder. He crept forward, his body low, moving like a cat. He parted the branches of a salt cedar and looked. It was the Rattlers' camp. 4 men. They were careless. Their horses were tethered loosely to a picket line. Still saddled, the men were gathered around a small fire, drinking coffee, laughing. Jeb, the leader, was one of them. And on a flat rock near the fire, Keldon saw it, his map, torn in half, weighted down with a rock. And beside the map, he saw the canvas bags. They were stenciled with red letters, danger, explosives. Beside them were wooden crates of dynamite sticks, coils of fuse, and a small tin box of blasting caps. They had brought enough explosives to destroy the spring, to collapse the rock fissure it flowed from, to divert the water for good. Jeb kicked the dirt. "Let's finish this. We go down, plant the charges just like Calder said. We light the fuses and ride out. By noon, that spring will be flowing west, straight to Calder's new reservoir land. Easy money." Keldon eased back. He looked at May. Her face was white, but her jaw was set. He whispered the plan. 4 of them. We cannot take them, but they are on foot. We are on horses. They're animals. If we take their horses, they are trapped here. It will take them a day to walk out. "How?" she whispered back. "I will make a noise. Over there." He pointed to the far side of the clearing. "It will draw their fire. When they look, you run for the picket line. Cut the reins. Scatter them. Whatever you do, just set them free. I will get the map. And the blasting caps. The dynamite is useless without the caps." May looked at the horses. She looked at Keldon. She had the gun in her pocket. She had her wits. And she had a sudden, brilliant, insane idea. "No," she whispered. "What?" "They expect a man. They expect a fighter. They do not expect me. You make the noise. But I will not scatter the horses. I will take them." "That is crazy," he hissed. "They will be looking at you. They will not be looking at me. I can ride. I will take them." Before he could argue, Keldon saw one of the men stand up, stretching. It was now or never. He nodded, a single sharp dip of his chin. "Be ready." Keldon picked up a rock, the size of a man's fist. He took a breath and hurled it with all his strength. It flew across the clearing, far to the left, and smashed against the canyon wall with a loud crack. "What the hell was that?" Jeb yelled, spinning, his rifle coming up. All 4 men turned, guns drawn, staring into the shadows where the rock had hit. In that one perfect second of distraction, May moved. She did not run low. She stood up and walked, quickly and calmly, out from behind the boulder, straight toward the tethered horses. One of the men glanced back. His eyes went wide. "Jeb, it's the woman, the schoolmarm." Jeb spun around. He saw May, her skirt hiked up, untying the horses, her hands moving with frantic speed. He raised his rifle. But Keldon was moving too. He broke cover, running straight for the fire, for the map and the blasting caps. "It's the scout," another man yelled. The camp was in chaos. A shot rang out. The bullet kicked up dust by Keldon's feet. He ignored it. He snatched the small tin of caps, shoving it deep into his shirt. He grabbed the 2 torn halves of his map. Jeb was aiming at Keldon. May, now free with the reins of 2 horses, saw it. She pulled the heavy revolver from her pocket. She did not have time to aim, to brace, to squeeze. She just pointed it at the sky and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The gun kicked so hard it almost flew from her grasp, stinging her arm to the shoulder. But it worked. Jeb and the other men flinched, ducking at the unexpected shot from their flank. "Now, Keldon!" May screamed. She leaped onto the back of the nearest horse. A clumsy, desperate scramble. She grabbed the reins of the second horse, kicked her own mount hard, and galloped straight for the narrow opening of the eagle slot. Keldon was right behind her. He sprinted, the remaining 2 rattlers firing wildly at him. The bullets whined off the rock. Angry, buzzing insects. "Get them, get the horses," Jeb roared, running after them. But he was on foot, and he was too late. May and Keldon plunged back into the dark, narrow safety of the canyon. They did not stop. They rode hard, scrambling over the rock. Keldon's pony and May's mule, which they had left tied, falling in behind them, drawn by Keldon's low whistle. They ran for a full mile, their lungs burning, the sound of the stolen horses' hooves echoing in the tight passage. Back in the clearing, Jeb stood, his face black with rage. He looked at the useless sticks of dynamite, and then at his 2 remaining men. She took our horses," one said, his voice full of disbelief. "You!" Jeb snarled at the man. "Get back to town, now. It will take you all day. Get to Calder. Tell him the war has started. Tell him the schoolmarm is not a schoolmarm anymore. And tell him I want them both dead. I do not care what it costs. Dead." May and Keldon finally stopped, hidden in a side canyon. May slid off the horse, her entire body shaking so violently she collapsed against the sandstone wall. She looked at her hands. They were raw and bleeding from the reins. She looked at the heavy revolver, which she still held. "We stole them," she whispered, her voice a mixture of horror and pure, wild triumph. "We stole their horses." Keldon was breathing hard, but his eyes were alive. He was fitting the 2 torn pieces of his map together. He had it. He had the blasting caps. "Yes," he said. May looked up from the gun, her eyes meeting his. The last of her fear was gone, burned away by gunpowder and adrenaline. "This is not a legal fight, is it?" she asked. "My petition, my words, they were never going to be enough. That sniper, the sheriff, this is the only way." Keldon stopped looking at the map. He looked at her, He saw the soot on her cheek, the blood on her hands, the iron in her spine. The woman who had arrived in a wool suit was gone. "No," he said, his voice quiet, but with a new, hard respect. "It is not. This is a war fought on the land, not on paper." He tucked the map into his shirt. "Welcome to the fight, schoolmarm." They did not ride back to La Estrella. The town was a spider's web, and they were the flies. Keldon led May, with the 4 horses in tow, on a long, circuitous route that followed the deep, dry arroyos, keeping them below the skyline. The sun was a hammer, and the land was the anvil. May's hands were raw. Her arms ached from the kick of the revolver, but her mind was sharp, cold, and clear. The woman who had been afraid of a narrow passage was gone. The woman who had stolen horses and fired a gun was riding in her place. "They will send a man back," Keldon said, his voice low. He was scanning the high canyon rims, his eyes missing nothing. "Jeb is a fool, but he is not a coward. He will send one of his men back to Calder. The rest will be trapped in that canyon for a day. But Calder will know. He will know we have his blasting caps." "So he will send more men," May stated. It was not a question. "He will send all of them." Keldon said, "We have stolen his thunder. He will answer with lightning." They needed to cross the main wash, a dry riverbed that cut the valley in two. It was the most dangerous part of the journey back to the high mesas, where Keldon could find his people. The only way across was a narrow, rickety wooden bridge, built for ore carts and sagging with age. It was a kill box. Keldon knew it. He stopped them in a grove of salt cedar, half a mile from the bridge. He dismounted and crept forward on foot. Using the brush for cover, May watched him, her heart a dry knot in her chest. He was gone for 10 minutes. When he returned, his face was stone. "Ambuscade," he whispered. 4 of them, on the far side, hidden in the rocks. They have rifles. They are watching the bridge. Calder must have sent them as soon as Thomas told Jeb about the map, May reasoned, her mind racing. They were a backup plan, in case we escaped. They are a wall. Keldon said, "We cannot go back. We cannot go around. It would take half a day. We must cross. How they will shoot us down before we are halfway." Keldon looked at the bridge, then at the steep, rocky walls of the arroyo. His eyes fell on the thick anchor rope, a massive twist of hemp as thick as a man's arm, that tethered the near side of the bridge to a massive iron ring bolted into the rock. He looked at May. "You will ride first," he said. "What?" "You will take your mule and the 2 stolen horses. You will ride onto that bridge. Do not run. Walk, calm, as if you are a traveler. They will not shoot. They will wait." "Wait for what?" she asked, her blood running cold. "For me," he said. "I am the one they want. I am the one who knows the land. I will be 50 yards behind you. When you are 3/4 of the way across, they will show themselves. They will try to take me. When they do, you ride. You ride as hard as you can. Do not look back." "What will you do?" Keldon drew his knife, the one that had disarmed the shotgun. "I will cut the anchor. I will break the bridge." "Keldon, no! You will be trapped. They will kill you." "They are on the far side," he said, his voice flat with patience. "If I cut the near side, the bridge will not fall completely. It will collapse. It will create a ramp that they cannot climb. It will block them. Now, go." She looked at him, at the absolute certainty in his face. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. May gathered the reins of the 3 animals. She kicked her mule, and it stepped out onto the bridge. The wooden planks groaned and rattled under the hooves. It sounded like thunder. She kept her head high, her back straight, just as he had told her. She did not look at the rocks on the far side. She looked at the trail beyond. Halfway, the heat was suffocating. She could feel the rifle sights on her back. 3/4. "There it is, the scout!" a voice roared from the rocks. Take him! The shooting started. 3 rifles opened up. Not at her, but at Keldon, who had just ridden out of the trees onto the bridge's ramp. The air split apart. Bullets splintered the wooden railing, whining past his head. "Now, May!" he bellowed. May screamed, kicking the mule, dragging the horses, galloping for the far bank. Keldon vaulted from his pony. He landed by the anchor post, the bullets kicking up dust around his feet. He began to hack at the thick rope, his knife a blur. The hemp was tough. It held. A bullet tore through the sleeve of his shirt, burning his arm. He ignored it. May was clear. She reached the far bank and leaped from the mule, turning, her own borrowed revolver in her hand. A rattler, impatient, broke cover and charged onto the far side of the bridge, aiming his rifle at Keldon's back. "Keldon!" May screamed. Keldon gave one last, desperate pull. The knife sliced through the last strands. The rope snapped with a sound like a cannon shot. The near side of the bridge groaned, tore free from its foundation, and dropped 12 feet. The entire structure sagged, the wooden roadbed cracking, turning into a steep, broken, impassable slide. The rattler who was charging was thrown from his horse, tumbling into the arroyo below. The other men on the far side were cut off, screaming in rage, their line of fire blocked by the wreckage. Keldon was already on his pony. He spurred it down the bank, under the ruined bridge, and up the far side, scrambling up the loose scree. May ran to him, grabbing his pony's bridle. "Your arm," she said, seeing the blood. "It is a scratch," he said, breathing hard. He looked at the screaming men on the other side. "They are blocked. For hours. Let's go." They rode hard, leaving the main trail, pushing into the canyons. They did not stop until the sun was low and the ruins of La Estrella were a dirty smudge in the distance. They found Thomas near the abandoned schoolhouse. He was not sweeping. He was huddled against the wall, his thin body shaking. He had been waiting for them. When he saw them, he burst into tears, a deep, racking sob of guilt and terror. "I did not know," he cried, scrubbing at his face with a dirty sleeve. "I did not know. He said it was for a party." He ran to Keldon and grabbed his hand. "I am sorry. Mr. Keldon, I am so sorry. I heard them. Jeb's man. He came back to town. He told Mr. Calder you were in the canyons. He said they were going to kill you. It is my fault." Keldon looked down at the boy, his face hard. But May slid from her mule. She was exhausted, covered in grime. But she went to the boy and knelt in the dust. She pulled him into an embrace, holding him tight as he sobbed against her shoulder. "No, Tomas," she said, her voice fierce and soft. "It is not your fault. You are a child. He is a monster. He tricked you. This is his sin, not yours." She held him back, looking him in the eyes. "But you must be brave now. We are not angry. We need your help. Can you help us?" "Anything," the boy whispered. "Good." She stood up. "When this is over, I am reopening this school, and it will not just be for the town children. It will be for everyone. For you, and for the dying children from the mesas. I will teach you. I will teach you to read and write so well that no man will ever be smart enough to lie to you again. Is that a promise?" The boy's tears slowed. A tiny spark of hope lit his eyes. "Yes, ma'am." Keldon, who had been watching, his expression unreadable, gave Tomas a nod. He trusted May's judgment. "Tomas," he said, his voice void of its earlier anger. "We have 2 horses we cannot keep. They are marked." He handed the reins to the boy. "Take them to the old, collapsed livery stable by the South Wash. Hide them, water them. Tell no one you saw us, no one. Can you be our scout now?" Tomas straightened his back. He was no longer a crying child. He was a soldier. "Yes, sir." He took the reins and, without a backward glance, led the horses into the shadows. "You were good with him. Keldon said.
I am a teacher,
May said, weariness hitting her suddenly. It is the one thing I know how to do. They were hidden in the schoolhouse. It was the last place anyone would look for them. Night fell. The town was alive with an angry, nervous energy. They could hear men shouting in the saloon, horses riding hard up and down the main street. Calder was hunting them. A faint, scraping sound came from the back wall. Keldon was on his feet instantly, the revolver in his hand. He moved to the door, silent as a ghost. A voice, choked and terrified, whispered,
Yazzie, Miss Sullivan.
Keldon eased the door open. It was Sheriff Ortega. He was not wearing his badge. His hat was pulled low, and his face was the color of old paper. He slipped inside, pushing the door shut.
You are dead,
Ortega hissed, his whole body shaking. You are both dead. Calder knows. He knows you have the blasting caps. He knows you wrecked the bridge. He has put a bounty on your heads. $500. Dead or alive. Why are you here, Sheriff? Keldon asked, his voice cold. He did not lower the gun. He came to my house, Ortega stammered, his eyes wild with fear. Calder, he said if I did not find you by midnight, he would let the rattlers. He would let them visit my wife and daughter. The man looked broken. He was weeping, silent tears cutting paths through the dust on his cheeks. I am a coward. Yazzie, I let him buy me. I let him threaten this town. But I will not let him touch my family. He fumbled inside his coat and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound ledger. He threw it on the dirt floor between them.
What is this?
May asked. It is his soul, Ortega whispered. It is his real ledger, not the one he shows the railroad bosses. It is everything, every bribe to the shipping agent, every payment to the rattlers, every illegal shipment of dynamite marked as mining equipment. It proves he has been planning this for a year. It is enough to hang him. It is the proof you said you needed, miss. Keldon looked at the book, then at the man.
A trade.
Yes, Ortega said, nodding desperately. Take it to the county seat. Ride to Judge Ferris. He is an honest man. He is the only one with the power to stop Calder. But you must swear to me, when this is over, when you use this to bring him down, you will protect my family. You will get them out of La Estrella. Swear it to me. May looked at Keldon. He held the sheriff's gaze for a long time, then nodded. We swear. The stage is watched, Ortega said, already backing toward the door. You will have to ride the high trail. God help you, miss. It is 60 miles. He opened the door, looked into the darkness, and was gone. May picked up the ledger. It was heavy with ink and with blood. He was right, she said to Keldon. We have to split up. Keldon was already checking his pony's tack. I know, the book is useless if the spring is destroyed, but the spring is doomed if the law does not come. I will go, May said. I will take the mule. She is slow, but she is steady. I can make it. No, Keldon said. You will take my pony. He is the fastest animal in this valley. I will take the mule. But you, what will you do? Calder is moving, Keldon said. He has more men. He has more dynamite. He will not wait. He will try to blow the spring before you are halfway to the county. I am going to my uncle. I will gather every man and boy who can ride. We will go to Clear Spring. We cannot win, but we can slow them. We can buy you time. It was a suicide mission. They both knew it. They stood in the ruin of the schoolhouse, the faint starlight showing the lines of exhaustion on their faces. They had a few hours. May had to ride under the cover of darkness. A shadow fell across the doorway. It was not Ortega. It was Dine Biaadi. He stepped inside, his blanket around his shoulders. The wind told me you were here, he said, his voice calm. He looked at May, and his eyes were soft. He held out a small, woven pouch, tied with turquoise thread. My nephew tells me you ride to the house of the white man's law. He said, I do, May replied, her voice thick. This is not magic, he said, placing the pouch in her hand. The white man thinks we make magic. We do not. We make reminders. This is a responsibility charm. It will remind you that the water is tied to the land, and the land is tied to the words, and the words are tied to us. It will remind you why you ride. May closed her hand around it.
Thank you. I will not fail.
Dinebiadi looked at his nephew. They spoke in the soft, flowing words of the Dine. Keldon nodded, his face set. The old man touched his shoulder, then looked at May one last time. You are a strong woman. You have the heart of a warrior. Be fast. He will be strong. The old man disappeared into the night, as silently as he had come. Keldon and May were alone. The air was charged, heavy with unspoken words, with the terrible risk that lay ahead. They sat by the broken window, watching the town. There was no time for a fire.
I used to live in a house with 3 floors,
May said suddenly, her voice very quiet.
It was in Boston. It was always cold. Even in summer, my father collected books. He never read them. He just had them. He wanted me to marry a man who owned a bank.
Keldon looked at her profile against the pale square of the window. My childhood was spent on the high mesa, he said, his voice just as quiet. I had no house. We moved with the sheep. I learned to be quiet, to listen to the wind. The wind taught me everything. My mother taught me to weave. My father taught me to ride. The world was simple. He looked at his hands. The army tried to teach me to be a white man. They taught me to kill. They taught me to hate my own skin. I was not a good student. She reached out in the darkness and, finding his hand, took it. His fingers were rough, calloused, but they were warm. They laced their fingers together. They sat in silence, hand in hand, brother and sister in a war they had not chosen. The wind picked up, blowing cold dust through the window, pattering against the walls. A dry, gritty rain.
Keldon,
May whispered, her voice tight.
If we live through this.
We will, he said. When we live through this, I am coming back. I am opening this school.
I know you are,
he said.
And I want to plant that garden,
she said, squeezing his hand.
The one we talked about. By the spring, I want to plant corn.
He turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers. He could just see the glint of tears on her lashes. He squeezed her hand back.
A 3 sisters garden,
he said, his voice soft.
Corn, beans, and squash. They help each other. The corn grows tall and the beans climb it. The squash spreads its leaves on the ground to keep the water in the earth. They cannot live apart.
Then that is what we will plant, she whispered. It was a promise. It was an oath. A sudden, frantic drumming of hooves shattered the night.
Tomas!
He slid his pony to a halt outside, his voice high with panic. Mr. Keldon May, I was at the livery. Calder is not waiting for dawn. He is moving now. He just rode out with 15 men. They are heading for the spring.
He said he would blow it before sunrise.
The timeline had collapsed. The race was on. Keldon and May were on their feet. He released her hand. The time for quiet was over. He ran to his pony and vaulted onto its back. May, ride, he commanded. His voice was the voice of the scout again, sharp and clear. Ride to the judge. Do not stop. Do not sleep. Do not look back.
And you,
she cried, pulling herself onto the mule. He will not get there first, Keldon said. I know a path he does not. I will be at that spring. I will hold them. Keldon, you will be alone. I will not be alone, he said, and his face was terrible to see. I will be with my ancestors. Now ride. He kicked his pony, and the animal leaped into the darkness, vanishing toward the mesas. May, with the ledger tied to her saddle and the charm clutched in her hand, kicked her mule. She rode, not east to the town, but south toward the high, dark pass that led to the county seat and to the law. They did not stay in the schoolhouse. It was a trap, a coffin of dry wood. Ortega's visit had proved it was the first place they would look. "Calder is not a fool," Keldon said, his voice a low growl in the darkness. "He knows Ortega broke. He knows we have the ledger. He will have every road out of this town watched by midnight." May clutched the heavy book to her chest. It was the only weapon that mattered now.
"Then how do we leave?"
"There is one way," Keldon said. He looked at Ortega, who was vibrating with a fear so deep it was almost silent. "The old grain warehouse, the one by the dead spur line. There is a tunnel. It runs from the sub-cellar to the old cantina on the edge of town. It was for moving whiskey during the war. It is the only way."
"They will be watching it,"
Ortega whispered, his voice rattling. "It is the first place—" "No," Keldon said. "Only 5 people in this valley know about that tunnel. I am one. Elena is another. The man who built it is dead. It is our only chance." "What about my family?" Ortega pleaded. "Your family is safer if you are gone," Keldon said, his voice hard. "If you are here, Calder will use them to make you talk. If you are gone, you are just a traitor. He will hunt you, but he will leave them alone. Now, we move." Moving through La Estrella at night was like walking on broken glass. Every dog bark, every distant shout from the saloon, made May's heart stop. Keldon moved first, a shadow flowing between shadows. He led them, not down the main street, but through a maze of back alleys, over sagging fences, through yards filled with rusted junk. May and Ortega followed, breathing the dust, their hands scraping on rough adobe walls. The warehouse loomed before them. It was a massive, collapsed box, its roof sagging, its windows dark and empty. It smelled of rat droppings and 1,000-year-old dust. Keldon eased a warped plank door open. A hinge screamed in the silence. A voice, thick with smug victory, echoed from the darkness inside. "That is far enough, Scout." A lantern flared, blinding them. Jeb. He was standing on a stack of feed sacks, his rifle leveled at Keldon's chest. 3 other rattlers stepped out from behind support beams, their guns also raised. They were surrounded. It had been a trap. "I knew you were smart, Yazzie." Jeb sneered. "I just did not know you thought I was stupid. You are the only one who uses these alleys." "Let them go, Jeb," Keldon said, his voice steady. He did not raise his hands. He kept them loose, his right hand just inches from the revolver May had given back to him. "Your fight is with me." "My fight is with whoever Mr. Calder pays me to fight," Jeb said. He nodded to his men. "Get the book. And the woman." Keldon moved. He was not a man. He was a blur. He shoved May and Ortega hard, sending them tumbling behind a high wall of stacked flour sacks. In the same motion, he drew and fired. His shot was not aimed at Jeb. It was aimed at the lantern. The glass shattered. The warehouse was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. An instant later, the darkness was split by muzzle flashes. The rattlers were firing blind, their bullets thudding into the sacks, sending up choking clouds of white flour. Keldon returned fire, once, then twice, from a different angle. He was moving. "Ortega," Keldon roared. "The tunnel south wall get May." "I am hit!" Ortega screamed. May, huddled at the bottom of the sack wall, felt him slump against her. She felt the warm, wet stickiness on his arm. "Where?" she whispered, her hands flying over him, the nurse taking over. "My shoulder, I cannot—" In the chaos, a hand clamped over May's mouth, a strong arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her, dragging her away from Ortega, away from the sound of Keldon's gun. She tried to scream, but the hand was too tight, a dirty glove tasting of salt and leather. She was pulled backward. stumbling over debris into a different section of the warehouse. The gunfire stopped. The silence that fell was worse. It was heavy, tense, filled with the sound of ragged breathing and the drip, drip, drip of Ortega's blood. "Keldon," she tried to call, but the hand muffled it. A match scraped, painfully bright. A new lantern was lit, its yellow light illuminating a small, contained area. She was not alone. Jeb was there, his face black with gunpowder and rage. With him was the man who held her, a big, rough-looking man she did not recognize. Jeb's rifle was pointed at her. "Well, well, lost your protectors." He looked around. "Yazzie Ortega, show yourselves, or I will start carving on the schoolmarm. I hear she is your sweetheart. Scout, is that right?" Only silence answered him. The man holding May laughed, a low, ugly sound. "She is a fighter, boss." Jeb stepped closer, the lantern light illuminating the malice in his eyes. He reached out and touched a strand of her hair, which had come loose. May flinched, repulsed. "You have caused me a lot of trouble, Miss Sullivan." Jeb sneered, his voice dropping. "Stealing our horses, running around the desert with him." He gestured vaguely to the shadows. "Playing hero, you are not so high and mighty now. Are you stuck in the dark with us?" The other man tightened his grip on her arms, pulling her back against his chest. "I bet she is not much of a miss anymore, boss, spending all that time in the canyons with a savage." The violation was worse than a bullet. It was a poison, intended to strip her of her dignity, to make her small, to make her a thing. "She is Calder's property now," Jeb said, "but he only said he wanted her alive. He did not say in what condition." He grinned, showing his yellow teeth. The other man laughed and reached for the top button of her blouse. It was the touch that broke her. The terror was absolute, a cold, paralyzing wall. But her rage was hotter. It was a fire that burned the fear away. She stomped her heel down, hard, on the man's instep. He howled in pain, his grip loosening. May tore herself free and stumbled back, her hand flying to her throat. She was trapped. They were between her and any possible exit. But she was not pleading. Her eyes were blazing. Her voice did not tremble. It rang out in the vast, dark space, sharp and clear as a bell. A command. "Do not touch me." Jeb and his man stopped, surprised by the venom in her tone. "You think you can just take," she cried, her voice rising. "You think you own every woman you see, that you can put your filthy hands on me?" She saw the look in their eyes, the predatory hunger, and she knew she had one weapon left: the truth. She threw it at them like a shield. "I am still a virgin," she declared, the words echoing off the high rafters. It was not a plea. It was a statement of fact, a claim of ownership. "My body belongs to me. It does not belong to you. It does not belong to anyone. And you will not lay a hand on it." The two men stared, momentarily stunned by her sheer, defiant audacity. In that half-second of silence, a shadow detached itself from the rafters high above them. Keldon dropped. He did not make a sound. He landed on the shoulders of the man who had held May, a silent, deadly weight. His knife flashed once, a streak of dull light in the gloom. The man collapsed without a sound, his spine severed. Jeb spun, raising his rifle, his face a mask of shock. Keldon was not there. He was moving, a blur in the darkness, tackling Jeb around the waist. The rifle went flying, skittering across the floor. Keldon did not stop. He grabbed May's arm, pulling her with him. "This way now." He dragged her behind a towering wall of 100-pound flour sacks, pulling her down into the safety of the shadows. They were hidden. Jeb scrambled for his rifle, his hands patting the floor in the dark. "Where are you, you coward?" he screamed into the blackness. He found the gun, stood up, and fired twice, wildly, into the shadows. The bullets thudded harmlessly into the sacks. He cursed, then ran for the main door. I will be back. I am burning this place to the ground." The door slammed. He was gone. In the sudden, absolute silence, May began to shake. The adrenaline fled, leaving a cold, sick terror in its wake. She was huddled against the sacks, her knees drawn up, gasping for breath. The image of the man's hand, the man's dead eyes, burning in her mind. She was going to be sick. Keldon's hand found her shoulder in the dark. He was breathing hard, but he was calm. "He is gone." She could not speak. She just shook. He moved closer, his presence a solid, warm shield. He needed to break the spell of her terror. He leaned his head close to hers, his whisper for her alone. "You were very brave," he said, his voice rough. He could feel the violent trembling of her body. "That was quite a speech you gave." A very faint, un-Keldon-like smile touched his lips in the darkness. "Do not worry, sweetheart," he murmured. She froze. He had never called her that. The word was so tender, so intimate. It was a shock. "That," he continued, his voice a low vibration, "will not last much longer. Not when you are truly ready." May stared into the blackness where his face was. She had faced death, had declared her virtue as a weapon, and now this man, this quiet, deadly scout, was gently teasing her about it. The absurdity of it, the sheer, unexpected tenderness of the promise. It broke her. A sound tore out of her, half sob, half laugh. It was a gasp of released panic, of pure, hysterical relief. The shaking did not stop, but the ice of her terror cracked. She leaned her head against the rough flour sack and laughed, tears streaming down her face. "Ortega," Keldon said, his hand still on her shoulder, giving it a final, firm squeeze. "The tunnel." They found the sheriff where they had left him, slumped against the sacks, holding his bloody arm. "He is gone," Keldon said. "Jeb." "I heard," Ortega gasped. He will be back, with Calder." "We will not be here." Keldon found the trap door, a square of wood hidden under a layer of spilled grain. He pulled it open. A waft of cold, damp air rose to meet them. "This is it," Keldon said, his voice hard. "May, Sheriff, this is your road. It ends in the cellar of the old cantina. From there, you can get to the livery, unseen. Take the horses, not mine. Take the 2 fastest, and ride." May looked at him, the darkness hiding her face. "You are not coming." "No," he said. "Keldon, they will hunt you. They will burn this town to find you. You must come. Testify. You are a witness." "You are the witness," he said. "You have the ledger. Ortega is the law. I am the land." He looked up, toward the high, broken roof. "Thomas was right. Calder is moving on the spring. Right now. While we were in this trap, he was riding. My people are at the spring. They are alone. I must go." "You will be 1 man against 20, she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I will not be 1 man, he said, his voice soft, but with the iron of the mountains in it. "I will be dying. I will be with my ancestors. I will buy you time. But you must be fast." He helped Ortega into the tunnel. The sheriff was weak, but his terror gave him strength. "I will protect her. Yazzie." Ortega gasped. "I swear it. I will get her to the judge." May stood at the edge of the hole. This was the split. This was the moment. "Keldon," she whispered. "Our garden." He reached out in the darkness and gripped her hand, his fingers strong and sure. "There is no garden without the spring. May, go, get the law. I will hold the land." He released her hand. "Be fast, schoolmarm," he said. May Sullivan took a deep breath, adjusted the ledger under her arm, and descended into the earth, leaving him alone in the darkness of the warehouse. She and Ortega emerged into the damp, spiderweb-filled cellar of the cantina. They slipped out the back, found the horses, and, using the arroyos for cover, rode south toward the high pass. May did not look back. Miles away, at the staging ground near Clear Spring, Ambrose Calder watched his men load the last of the dynamite. Jeb rode up, his horse lathered, his face a mask of fury. "They are gone, boss, the scout, the woman, and the sheriff. They had the ledger. They took the tunnel." Ambrose Calder looked at the eastern sky. A faint, pearly gray was beginning to silhouette the mesas. Dawn was in less than 2 hours. "It does not matter," Calder said, his voice cold and flat. "The law is 60 miles away. We are here." He turned to his foreman. "They will be too late. Plant the charges now." The race against the dawn was a race run on 2 separate, desperate fronts. May Sullivan rode with the ghost of Keldon at her back. She did not know if he was alive or dead. She knew only that he had promised to hold the land, and she held the law. Keldon's pony was a miracle, a creature of wind and rock. It devoured the 60 miles of high, dark trail, its hooves striking sparks in the night. Sheriff Ortega, his face a gray mask of pain, rode beside her. His shattered arm was bound to his chest, but he did not complain. He just rode. They arrived at the county seat as the first, pale, sick light of morning touched the sky. It was a proper town, built of brick and ambition, centered around a courthouse with a proud copper dome, green with age. It was just past 7 o'clock. Keldon had run. He had left the warehouse and moved through the rocks of the high mesa not as a man, but as a shadow. He reached his uncle's settlement before the moon had set. He did not need to shout. The alarm had already been given. Calder's main party, 15 strong, had been seen riding hard for the spring. Dina Biadi met him, his face carved of granite. 7 young men, the best riders, the strongest swimmers, gathered in the darkness. They were armed with 2 old rifles, knives, and a courage that was colder and harder than any steel. They were not a war party. They were the valley's immune response. They reached the high ground overlooking Clear Spring as the sky turned from black to purple. They were too late. Calder was there. His men, moving with brutal efficiency, were already at work. They were planting charges, not just 1, but a dozen, wedged deep into the fissures of the rock from which the spring emerged. May and Ortega all but fell from their horses. They staggered up the courthouse steps, their legs numb. The building was cool and silent, smelling of floor wax and old, dry paper. Behind a high-polished desk, a young clerk with a green eye shade was sorting papers. He looked up, his expression one of pure annoyance. "The building is not open. Court does not convene until 9 o'clock. Judge Ferris is in a private hearing." "This is an emergency," Ortega said, his voice a dry rasp. He leaned on the counter, holding up his one good hand to show his badge. "I am Sheriff Ortega of La Estrella. We must see the judge. Now." The clerk looked at the badge. Then he looked at Ortega's bloody, filthy shirt, and at May, her skirt torn, her face streaked with soot, her hair wild. He sniffed, a small, dismissive sound. Judge Ferris gave specific instructions not to be disturbed. As he spoke, a man in a fine suit, a man May recognized as a railroad lobbyist from Santa Fe, slid a sealed envelope across the desk. The clerk took it, his hand moving like a snake, and made it disappear into a drawer. "You will have to wait your turn, like everyone else." "We do not have a turn," May said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "While we wait, men are being murdered." "That is not my concern, madam," the clerk said, turning back to his papers. "Now, if you will please wait." Keldon lay flat on the sandstone ridge, his belly pressed to the cold rock. He watched Calder's foreman, a man in a red shirt, connect the last of the wires. They were not using separate fuses. They were smarter than that. They had run all the detonator wires to a single, thick, waterproofed fuse line. That master line ran from a blasting machine on the bank and disappeared into the deepest,
most turbulent part of the pool. They are mining the heart. Keldon whispered to the young man beside him. His cousin. If they light that fuse, the fissure will collapse. The water will be gone. Forever. We cannot shoot, his cousin whispered back, his knuckles white on his old rifle. They are too many, and they are standing on the dynamite. One stray shot. We do not shoot. Keldon said. We cut the line. He looked at the water. It was a beautiful, impossible turquoise in the growing light. It was pure snowmelt. He knew, as only a man born of this land could know, that the water was so cold it burned the skin. To stay in it for more than a minute was to die. He had sent Tomas, the fastest, smallest runner, on a separate path, a high goat track, to watch from the cliffs above. You, Keldon said to his cousin, take 2 men, get to the far ridge. When I am in the water, make noise, draw their fire, make them look away from the spring. He stripped off his shirt. The morning air was thin and cold. It raised goose flesh on his skin. He took his knife from its sheath and clenched the hilt between his teeth. He looked at the men by his side. For our grandmothers, he said. Then he slid over the edge of the rock, disappearing like a snake into the tall, thick reeds at the water's edge. May looked at the clerk. She looked at the tall, imposing oak doors that read, Chambers of the Honorable Judge Ferris. She could hear the low, angry murmur of voices from within. She thought of Keldon. She thought of the promise they had made in the darkness, the garden of 3 sisters. She thought of the spring and the cold, dead silence if it was destroyed. She walked past the desk. Madam, the clerk shouted, lunging to his feet. You cannot go in there, stop. May put her hand on the heavy brass handle. I am not asking. She shoved the doors open. The room was vast, paneled in dark, rich wood. At a high bench, Judge Ferris, a formidable man with a snow-white beard and the robes of his office, was in the middle of a sentence. He stopped. He looked up, his face turning a deep, thunderous purple. The lawyers at the tables below stared, their mouths agape. What is the meaning of this? The judge boomed, his voice filling the room. Bailiff, remove this woman. She is in contempt. There is no time, May cried, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the legal stillness. She walked to the center of the room. Ortega, clutching the ledger, stumbled in behind her. My name is May Sullivan. I am here from La Estrella, and while you sit in your warm, safe room, a man named Ambrose Calder is illegally, violently, and at this very second, planting dynamite to destroy the only water source for 500 people. Keldon slipped into the spring. The cold was a physical blow. It was not water. It was a solid wall of ice. It drove the air from his lungs in a single, painful gasp. His muscles seized. He forced himself under, his eyes wide open in the turquoise gloom. The pain was absolute. He fought it. He swam down, his hands searching, his lungs already burning. He found it, the thick, rubbery fuse line, wedged in a crevice, leading to the heart of the spring. He began to saw at it with his knife. A shout from the bank. Boss, look, Bubbles. He had been seen. He surfaced, gasping, trying to hide in the reeds. It is the scout, a rattler yelled. 2 men ran to the bank and began firing their pistols into the water. Bullets zipped past Keldon's head, thudding into the mud, whining off the rocks. He dived again, the cold seizing his joints, making his hands clumsy. The fuse was thick, his knife was sharp, but the rubber was tough. His lungs were on fire. He needed air. At that moment, a high, keening yell echoed from the far ridge. Keldon's cousins. They sounded like 50 men, not 3. Ambuscade, Calder's foreman roared, spinning. Jeb, get up there, pincer them, stop them. The men who had been shooting at Keldon turned, along with 6 others, and began running for the ridge, firing their rifles into the rocks. It was the opening.
Keldon surfaced, pulling himself halfway onto a slick, flat stone. He was shaking so violently he could barely hold the knife. His skin was turning blue. The sun had just cleared the top of the mesa. Its light was a sudden, blinding white sheet. Keldon reached into the small medicine pouch on his belt. He pulled out the small, polished copper disc his uncle had given him. A prayer mirror. He held it up, his hands shaking, and angled it. He caught the full, intense blast of the new morning sun. He flashed it, once, twice, directly into the eyes of the two men Calder had left guarding the blasting machine. They cried out, throwing their hands up to their faces, completely blinded. Keldon did not wait. He lunged from the water, a single, agonizing movement. He landed on the muddy bank, drove his knife down onto the fuse line where it lay on the rock, and sawed through it with the last of his strength. The line was cut. Outrageous. Judge Ferris slammed his gavel. You make these claims without proof. I have proof, May shouted back. She grabbed the heavy ledger from Ortega and threw it onto the polished lawyer's table. It landed with a sound like a gunshot. This is his private ledger. It details every bribe, every payment to the Rattler gang, whom he employs as his private army. It details the arson of the Dine storehouse. It details the plan to seize the spring. Your Honor. Sheriff Ortega stepped forward. His face was slick with sweat, but his voice was steady. My name is Armando Ortega. I am the sheriff of La Estrella, and I am her proof. The courtroom fell into a shocked, absolute silence. Ortega reached up, unpinned his badge, and laid it on the table next to the ledger. Everything she says is true. I am a complicit witness. Ambrose Calder blackmailed me. Using my family, I covered up his crimes. I confiscated this petition. He pulled the crumpled, torn letter from his pocket. I am guilty of dereliction of duty, of cowardice, but I am not guilty of murder. Ambrose Calder this is his ledger. I stake my life, and my honor, on it. Judge Ferris stared at Ortega. He stared at the badge. He stared at May. He was a hard man, but he was not a fool. This was not hysteria. This was a confession. He picked up the ledger. His eyes flew across the columns. He saw the names, the figures, the coded entries for dynamite. His face, which had been purple with rage, turned a cold, pale white. He looked up, his eyes like chips of ice. He looked at the cowering clerk. Mr. Allen, you are under arrest. He looked at his bailiff. Send a telegraph. Send it to the United States Marshal's Service in Santa Fe. I want a full detachment, armed for war. I'm signing a federal injunction, effective immediately, freezing all assets and all construction related to Ambrose Calder and the La Estrella rail extension. And, bailiff. Yes, Your Honor. Issue a warrant for the arrest of Ambrose Calder and every man in his employ, for conspiracy, for fraud, for insurrection, and for attempted murder. Do it now. Keldon collapsed onto the bank, his strength gone. The cold had stolen his bones. He had done it. The main line was cut, but as he looked up, his heart stopped. The foreman in the red shirt was not running. He was standing by the spring, laughing. He pointed. You missed one. Savage. Keldon looked. His blood turned to ice. A secondary line. A single, short fuse, already lit and sputtering, leading to a massive bundle of dynamite sticks wedged deep in the mouth of the spring itself. A fail-safe. The foreman had lit it while all eyes were on the ridge. Keldon tried to stand. He could not. He tried to dive, but his legs were numb. Useless. He scrambled, falling back into the shallow water, trying to pull himself toward the sputtering fuse. His boot slipped. It went down, into a crevice between two large stones under the water. He pulled. It was stuck. He was trapped. The icy current was pulling him, holding him down. The fuse hissed, 6 feet away, 5. He was going to fail. He was going to die, trapped, watching it burn. Tomas! He roared, his voice a raw scream of despair. The boy's small, terrified face appeared on the cliff high above. Thomas, the bag. The one May left. The dream catcher. Throw it. Throw it in the water. Show me the current now. Thomas fumbled, his hands shaking. He pulled the small, webbed hoop from the bag and hurled it out into the pool. It landed on the surface, bobbed once, and then was swiftly sucked into a powerful eddy, swirling directly toward the fissure where Keldon was trapped. Keldon saw it. The current, it was not pulling him down. It was pulling him sideways, into the fissure. He stopped fighting the water. He let it take him. He twisted his body, letting the current pivot him, yanking his leg at a new, sharp angle. His boot tore. His foot came free. He had one breath. He followed the path of the dream catcher, moving with the water. Not against it. He plunged under. He saw the bundle of dynamite. He saw the white, sputtering end of the fuse, burning down, just inches from the first stick. He saw the blasting cap, the small, copper cylinder of death, inserted into the dynamite. There was no time to cut. He grabbed the cap with his frozen, numb fingers. He braced his feet against the rock, and he pulled. The cap, with the fuse still attached, ripped free from the waxy paper of the dynamite stick. Keldon surfaced, a human explosion of water and desperation. He held the lit, sputtering cap high in the air. The foreman on the bank stared, his mouth open, his confidence shattered. The fuse burned down to Keldon's fingers, searing his skin. He did not feel it. He dropped the cap. It hit the surface of the pool and was extinguished with a faint silence. A deep, profound silence, broken only by the sound of Keldon's ragged breathing and the gunfire. Far away, on the ridge, the foreman stared at the inert, useless bundles of dynamite. He looked at Keldon. Keldon hung onto the rock, his body a single, agonizing tremor, his lungs on fire, but he was alive. And he was watching the spring. The water, clear and cold and pure, bubbled up from the heart of the earth, its flow uninterrupted, its voice the only sound that mattered. It still flowed. Ambrose Calder received the news by telegraph, the clicking wire that was his lifeblood. His connection to the banks and the markets now spelled his doom. The clerk in the county seat, the one on his payroll, had sent a single coded word injunction. Calder was not at the spring. He had seen the failure there, had watched Keldon Yazzie hold up the sputtering cap. He had left his men, Jeb and the foreman, to their own fate, and had ridden his black stallion back to La Estrella in a cold, silent fury. The injunction meant the marshals were coming. It meant his accounts were frozen. It meant the ledger, the one that fool Ortega had stolen, was now in the hands of the law. He was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who changed the rules. If the law was coming from the county seat, it would come on the morning train. The one arriving at 10 o'clock, it would carry May Sullivan, Armando Ortega, and that damning book. He had one last play. He still had the town. He still had the station. And he had one man held in reserve for just such an emergency. A man from El Paso, a professional, who had been sitting in the saloon for a week, drinking Calder's whiskey and waiting. Calder went to the saloon. The man, whose name was Corvus, was sitting alone, polishing the lenses of a brass scope. He did not look up. "They are coming," Calder said, dropping a heavy bag of gold coin on the table. "The 10 o'clock train. There is a woman, a man, wounded, and a book. I want the book. I want the woman. And I want the wounded man dead. You will be on the roof of the depot. No one must reach the station platform." Corvus looked at the gold, then at Calder. His eyes were pale, the color of a winter sky. "And the scout, the Navajo. He is dead at the spring," Calder said, his voice flat. "He is irrelevant." Corvus smiled, a thin, dry parting of his lips. He picked up his rifle, a heavy, long-barreled Sharps,
He is never irrelevant, Mr. Calder, but for this much gold, it does not matter. The 10 o'clock train was late. The sun was high, baking the single street of La Estrella. The town was quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath. The rattlers, those who had returned from the fiascos at the bridge in the spring, had taken the station. They were nervous. They had seen Calder's cold fury. They had seen Corvus climb to the depot roof, his rifle in its leather case. The air was thick with smoke. Calder had his private engine fired up on a side spur, steam hissing from its pistons. He was ready to run, but not without the ledger. From the north, a small group of riders appeared. They were not on the road. They were in the rocks. It was Keldon Yazzie. He was not dead. He was barely alive. After the spring, his people had found him, had wrapped him in dry blankets, had poured hot broth down his throat. His cousin had given him his own pony. He was hypothermic, his hands and feet numb, his shoulder screaming where the bullet had grazed him. But he was there. With him were the 6 other Dine warriors. They carried their old rifles and their knives. From the south, another group appeared. It was May, riding Keldon's pony. Beside her was Ortega, his face white, his body swaying in the saddle. They were not alone. The judge had sent a single, grizzled county deputy with them. He wore 2 guns and a look of grim determination. He was carrying the official warrant. May was carrying the ledger, wrapped in oilcloth and strapped to her saddle. And from the town itself, a third force emerged. Elena, the widow, stepped onto the boardwalk, holding a double-barreled shotgun. The blacksmith came from his forge, his massive smithing hammer in his hand. Thomas, who had run all the way from the spring, stood beside him. Even the mercantile owner, his courage finally bought back, stood in his doorway with a buffalo rifle. The town, the Dine, and the law, they had all come to the same place. They had formed a silent, accidental alliance, surrounding the train station. "He is on the roof," Keldon said. His voice was a raw croak. He had seen the glint of the sun on the brass scope. "The high roof." "That is Corvus," the deputy said, his face grim. "He is the best. We are pinned down." Corvus proved him right. The deputy raised his hat on a stick to draw fire. The Sharp's rifle bellowed, a deep thum that echoed off the mesas. The hat exploded, a puff of felt and dust. The shot was perfect. They were 400 yards away. "We cannot cross the plaza," the deputy said, his voice tight. "He will pick us off one by one." "The wind," Keldon whispered. He licked his finger and held it up. He crumbled a handful of dust and let it sift through his fingers. "It is changing. It is blowing from the east, but there is a crosswind from the south, off the water tower." He looked at his cousin. "We need to get to the mercantile roof. It is the only other high ground." "We will give you cover," the blacksmith yelled. He and the others in the street began firing at the station. A sporadic, useless volley of shots designed to make noise, to draw attention. In the chaos, Keldon and his cousin slipped across the street, disappearing into the alley. May, Ortega, and the deputy were trapped behind a watering trough. The ledger felt like a block of lead. "We have to get that warrant to Calder," Ortega gasped, sweating. "We have to serve it." "You will not live to take 10 steps, the deputy said. May was watching the mercantile roof. She saw a flicker of movement. Keldon, he had made it. He was settling in, his old rifle resting on the parapet. He was too far away to see clearly, but she knew it was him. A shot came from the depot roof. Corvus. He had seen Keldon. The bullet struck the brick chimney near Keldon's head, sending up a spray of mortar. Keldon fired back. His shot was high. The wind. Corvus fired again. This one was closer. Keldon was trapped. He could not get a clear shot. Corvus was hidden behind a metal water cistern on the roof, firing through a gap. Keldon could not see him. May watched. Her heart stopped starting. She saw Keldon fire again. At the sound, he missed. Corvus had the better rifle. He had the better position. He was just waiting. May looked down. Her bag was at her feet. Inside, she had a small, silver-backed mirror, a relic from her life in Boston. She remembered Keldon's eyes. The way he read the land, he needed to see. She pulled out the mirror. She angled it, catching the high, bright sun. A dazzling beam of light shot out. She flashed it once, at the mercantile roof. Keldon saw it. He looked down, shielding his eyes. He saw her, a small figure by the trough. She flashed the mirror again, not at him, but at the depot roof, at the dark shadow beside the water cistern. She was painting the target. Keldon understood. He nodded, a small gesture she could not possibly see. Corvus saw the light. It was annoying, a distraction. He ignored it, focusing on Keldon's position. He settled in for the killing shot. He took a breath, letting it out slow. May flashed the mirror again, this time directly at the gap in the cistern, the dark hole where Corvus was hiding. Keldon had been waiting. He was not aiming at the man. He was aiming at the light. He aimed at the flash of his own sun, reflected back at him. He factored in the wind. The slight drop, the updraft from the hot roof. He squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect. It went straight through the gap. Corvus did not make a sound. His rifle fired. One last, convulsive shot, straight into the air. He rose to his feet, a look of pure, theological surprise on his face. He stood there for a full second, silhouetted against the sky, then fell forward and rolled, tumbling from the roof to land in a broken heap in the street below. A vast, echoing silence fell over the town. On the mercantile roof, Keldon did not celebrate. He was looking at the depot. Another man, one of Calder's rattlers, had taken Corvus's place, stepping out from behind a chimney. He was not a marksman. He was just angry. He raised his rifle and fired wildly at Keldon. Keldon felt it, a white-hot poker, driven straight through his left shoulder. The force of it knocked him backward. He dropped his rifle. He heard a voice, far away. It was May, screaming his name. May was running. She had left the safety of the trough. The deputy was yelling at her to stop, but she did not hear him. She ran across the open plaza, the battle still raging below. Bullets from the station windows kicking up dust around her. She ran into the mercantile, up the stairs, and burst onto the roof. He was there, slumped against the chimney, his face pale, his eyes closed. Blood was everywhere, a bright, shocking red against the dust. "No," she whispered. "No." She fell to her knees beside him. She ripped a long strip of fabric from her petticoat, her hands shaking. "Keldon! Keldon! Look at me!" His eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused. "May, I am here," she said, her voice fierce. She wadded the cloth and pressed it, hard, into the bleeding hole in his shoulder. He cried out, a sharp, choked sound. "You must not sleep," she commanded, her voice breaking. She pressed down with all her weight, her arms trembling. "Do you hear me? You promised me a garden. You do not get to sleep." He looked at her, his vision clearing. He saw the soot on her face, the desperation in her eyes, the love that was so bright it hurt to look at. He was freezing again, the familiar cold creeping in, but this time it was not from water. "Stay awake," she whispered, her words for him alone, her face close to his. "Stay with me." She was no longer a schoolteacher. She was life. She was the anchor. He put his good hand over hers, pressing it to his wound. "A garden," he whispered. "By the spring." He held on, his eyes fixed on hers, refusing to let the darkness take him. Down below, the fight had turned. The death of Corvus had broken the back of the defense. Ambrose Calder saw it. He saw his men, Jeb and the foreman, firing from the windows with no hope.
He saw the townsfolk in the dine advancing. It was over. He ran from the depot office, not toward the fight, but toward the side spur, where his private engine was hissing, steam up, ready to run. He shoved the engineer aside and leaped into the cab. He grabbed the throttle. He was going to escape. He did not see the man standing on the tracks 50 yards ahead. It was Sheriff Ortega. He was pale, his arm in its bloody sling. But he was standing. His one good hand held his revolver, and it was steady. "Stop!" Ortega yelled. Calder ignored him. He opened the throttle. The engine's massive wheels began to turn, grinding, catching. Ortega did not shoot. He held up his other hand. In it was a piece of paper, the warrant. "Ambrose Calder," he shouted, his voice ringing with the authority he had lost and just reclaimed. "By the power vested in me by the County of New Mexico, and in accordance with the injunction from Judge Ferris, I hereby place you under arrest." Calder snarled. He was not stopping. He would run the man down. The engine picked up speed. 10 yards. 5. Ortega stood his ground. He did not flinch. It was Calder who broke. He could not do it. He could not commit murder in front of the entire watching town. He slammed the brake. The engine screamed, metal on metal, sparks flying as the massive wheels locked. It stopped, its pistons hissing, less than a foot from where Ortega stood. The cab door opened, and Calder stepped down. His face was the color of ash. He was defeated. Ortega walked forward, his revolver still level. He pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around." Calder turned. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest sound in the valley. With Calder in cuffs and Corvus dead, the fight was over. The rattlers saw it. They threw their guns from the depot windows. One by one, they walked out, their hands in the air. Jeb, his face black with rage and fear, was the last one. He walked out and saw Keldon, supported by May, slowly, painfully, making his way down the mercantile stairs. Jeb was cornered. He looked at Keldon. He looked at the Dine warriors, who were watching him with flat, cold eyes. He dropped his pistol in the dust and raised his hands. Keldon stumbled forward, his own revolver in his good hand. He raised it. This was the man who had burned the storehouse. This was the man who had laid his hands on May, who had threatened to carve her. His finger tightened on the trigger. He could end it. One shot. May put her hand on his arm. "Keldon, no." He looked at the man. He saw the fear in Jeb's eyes, the pathetic surrender. He thought of the blue-coated soldiers who had shot his people when they were unarmed. He was not them. He would not become them. He lowered the gun. "The law will hang him," he said, his voice raw. He looked at the deputy. "He is yours." His principle, his identity as a Dani, was stronger than his anger. He had truly come home. As the deputy bound Jeb's hands, a new sound began. It was Tomas. He had climbed into the station and was pulling the rope on the big brass train bell. It rang out, clear and loud, over the plaza, over the town, over the mesas. It was not a sound of arrival. It was a sound of victory. A victory won not by blind violence, but by a handful of brave people who had decided to stand, and by the law that had finally, painfully, arrived. The U.S. Marshals arrived 2 days later, not on a special train, but riding in a dusty posse, their faces hard and their eyes missing nothing. They had been in Santa Fe, and they had ridden hard. They found Ambrose Calder in Ortega's jail cell, a place the sheriff had meticulously cleaned. They found the rattlers, including Jeb and the foreman, chained in the livery stable under the guard of the county deputy and the blacksmith. The law, when it finally arrived, was not a lightning bolt. It was a slow, grinding glacier. The investigation took weeks. Men in dark suits came from back east, poring over Calder's seized ledger. The railroad, in a flurry of telegrams, disavowed all of Calder's actions. calling him a rogue agent and immediately halting all plans for the La Estrella spur line. Ambrose Calder's assets, his bank, his claims, his half-built reservoir were seized by federal order. And most importantly, a federal judge, acting on the testimony of May Sullivan, Armando Ortega, and Dane Biadi, signed a decree Clear Spring and the surrounding 300 acres was to be designated as a protected community trust. It belonged to no single man, but to all the people of the valley, for all time. The paper May had tried to post on the notice board had finally, through blood and fire, become law. Sheriff Ortega faced his own judgment. He did not run. He did not hide. He stood before the town, a week after the battle, his arm in a clean sling, his badge not on his chest but in his hand. The meeting was held in the street, in the shadow of the repaired depot. The townsfolk, the dine, the federal marshals, all were there.
"I failed you,"
Ortega said, his voice quiet, but it carried in the still air.
"I was a coward. I was afraid for my family, and I used that as an excuse to let a shadow fall on this valley. I broke my oath."
He looked at the Dun, at Dine Biadi, who stood in the front row. "I allowed your people to be terrorized. I have no excuse. I am guilty." He laid his badge on the crate that served as a podium. "I have resigned, but the election is in 1 month. I am asking you, not for forgiveness, but for a chance. I am running for the office of sheriff. I am running as a man who knows, now, what the law is for. I will not be bought again." The town was silent. It was Elena who stepped forward first. "You are a fool, Armando Ortega, but you are our fool, and you stood on those tracks. You did not flinch." She turned to the crowd. "I will vote for him. He has learned his lesson in a way no new man ever could." A low murmur of agreement went through the crowd. He had confessed. He had named his own shame. And in the West, a man who owned his own cowardice had a chance to own his courage. May did not wait for the law. She had work to do. The schoolhouse was a ruin, shot through with bullet holes and stained with old dirt. She came the next morning, her sleeves rolled up, a bucket in her hand. She was alone for perhaps 10 minutes. The blacksmith arrived first. He carried new, straight pine boards for the windows. "Heard you needed these, miss." He did not ask. He just began working. The mercantile owner came next, carrying 2 tins of paint and a new, unblemished blackboard. "This was a misorder," he said, avoiding her eyes. "You may as well have it." Elena came with Thomas, and they brought brooms and lye soap. By the end of the day, the schoolhouse was not a ruin. It was clean, it was solid. The windows were framed, and the walls were patched. The next Monday, May rang an old iron bell that the blacksmith had hung for her. She had 9 students. Thomas was in the front row, his face scrubbed, his hair slicked down. The mercantile owner's son was beside him. The blacksmith's 2 daughters were there, and sitting in the back row, their faces shy but their eyes bright and curious, were 4 Dine children, Keldon's young cousins. May Sullivan stood in front of the new blackboard. She picked up a piece of white chalk. She looked at the faces, the pale and the brown, the ones from the town and the ones from the mesa. She wrote a word, water. Underneath it, in careful, blocky letters, she wrote another word, to. "This is the word for water in English," she said, pointing to the first. "It is what we speak in this town." She pointed to the second. "And this is the word in Dine. It is what we speak in this land, in this classroom. We will learn both, because in this valley we cannot survive without both." Keldon healed slowly. The bullet had torn through the muscle and sinew, and the cold from the spring had settled deep in his bones. He spent the first week in his uncle's dwelling, feverish, lost in dreams of blue-coated soldiers and the sound of gunfire. May came every day. She rode the mule, the one she had ridden to the county, out to the mesa. She brought the medicine the doctor in town had given her, but she also brought her own.
She brought clean bandages. She brought patience. She would sit by his pallet, changing the dressing on his shoulder, her touch firm and confident. He was weak, and he hated it. He hated the feeling of helplessness. "You must be still," she would tell him, her voice low, as she cleaned the wound. "You are a terrible patient, Keldon Yazzie." "You are a terrible nurse," he would rasp back, wincing as the antiseptic stung him. "You are too rough." "Then I will be rougher," she would say, her eyes smiling. And for a moment, they would be alone. The rest of the world and its dangers held at bay by the thin walls of the dwelling. On the 10th day, the fever broke. He woke, and his mind was clear. The nightmares were gone. He was lying on his side, and May was asleep in a chair, her head resting on her arms on the small table. The morning light touched her face, highlighting the lines of exhaustion, the smudge of dust on her cheek that she had missed. He watched her sleep. He had fought for the land. He had fought for his people. But he knew, in that quiet moment, that he had truly been fighting for her. He had been fighting for this, for a future that held this quiet, this rightness. The ghosts of the cavalry, the anger and the mistrust, had been washed away. Not by the spring, but by her. He was no longer a man between two worlds. He was a man who had found his world, and she was sitting in it. He must have moved, because her eyes opened. They were cloudy with sleep, then focused on him. "Keldon," she said, her voice soft, "your fever is gone." "May?" he said, and the way he said her name, it was a thank you, it was a promise, it was everything. That evening, there was a fire. It was not a fire of war or destruction. It was a fire of story. Dine Biadi sat before it, his hands moving as he spoke. The community was there, wrapped in blankets against the high desert chill. May and Keldon sat together, slightly apart from the others. Keldon's arm was in a sling, but he was strong. Dine Biadi told a story. He told of two trails. One trail was born in the lowlands, in the mud, where the water is slow and wide. He said, it was a good trail, but it was straight. It learned the way of the square box, the paper, the iron rule. It moved fast, and it believed its own speed was wisdom. The other trail was born of the high rock, of the wind, of the twisting canyon. It learned the way of the circle, the pollen, the changing season. It moved slowly, and it believed its patience was strength. He looked at the fire, his old eyes seeing the patterns in the flames. For a long time, the trails ran apart. The straight trail did not respect the winding trail. The winding trail did not trust the straight trail. But a great thirst came upon the land, and the trails found they were both seeking the same spring. He smiled, a deep, slow smile. The straight trail learned that iron cannot break rock without bending. The winding trail learned that patience cannot stop a flood without a wall. And so, at the edge of the water, the two trails met. They did not end. They became one, a new path, stronger than either, winding and straight, patient and fast, a trail that could lead a whole people home. He looked, for just a moment, at Keldon and May. The firelight flickered in their eyes. The allegory was not for them alone, but for the whole valley, but they felt it as a blessing. A few days later, Keldon was strong enough to walk. He and May went to Clear Spring. The bundles of dynamite were gone, removed by the marshals. The scars of the battle were already fading. The water bubbled, clear and strong, as it had for 10,000 years. They stood on the bank where he had almost died. "This is the place," he said, his voice quiet. He touched the new, clean earth. "This is where we will plant." May knelt beside him. "The three sisters." "Yes." He took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. "I have been thinking, we will build a house here, small, of adobe and stone, like my uncle's, but with your windows, with glass, so the light can come in." "A house?"
May said, the word tasting strange and wonderful.
And a garden, he said. The corn goes in first. It is the strong one, the elder, then the beans. They climb the corn, and they put the strength back into the earth, and then the squash on the outside. Its big leaves cover the ground. It protects the others. It keeps the water in. He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. They cannot live alone. May, they must grow together. They help each other. They are a family. She knew he was not just talking about corn. A family, she whispered. Yes, Keldon, that is what we will plant. The next day, the schoolhouse was full. The children were learning to write their names before the first lesson. Thomas went to the porch. He held the small, webbed dream catcher that Keldon had given him, the one that had marked the current. He tied it with a piece of rawhide to a nail above the schoolhouse door. Why are you putting that there? The blacksmith's daughter asked. It is for the school, Thomas said, his voice proud. It is thine. It catches the bad dreams, the bad thoughts, and lets only the good ones through. He stepped back. The small, simple hoop, woven with sinew and adorned with a single blue feather, turned slowly in the wind. It was a promise. It was a shield. That week, the people of the valley held a Thanksgiving. It was not a formal holiday. It was a shared meal by the spring. There was no minister, no grand speeches. Dinebiadii came, and his family brought venison and roasted corn. Elena came, and she brought 3 fresh-baked loaves of bread, her first in a long time. The blacksmith and the mercantile owner brought a barrel of cider. Even Sheriff Ortega was there, his wife and daughter at his side, his badge polished and pinned firmly to his chest. They were not one people. They were dine, and they were settlers. But they ate together. They shared the same bread and the same water, from the same spring. It was not a fusion, it was a respectful alliance. They had, at last, chosen the same shore. The season turned. The high, thin wind of late autumn gave way to the sharp, cold breath of early winter. The valley, which had lived on a knife edge of thirst and violence, settled into a new kind of quiet. It was not a quiet of fear, but of recovery. The U.S. Marshals had left, taking Calder, Jeb, and the remnants of the Rattler gang in chains to stand trial in Santa Fe. The news came back, weeks later, that Calder's power was broken, his Eastern partners ruined by the contents of his own ledger. He would never see the valley again. The first snows dusted the high peaks of the mesas, a promise of the moisture to come. The harvest, though small, had been gathered, and the people of the valley, for the first time, gathered to celebrate it together. It was not a formal festival. It was a joining. They met at Clear Spring, the ground now sacred to them all. Dinebiadii had brought his family, and they sat around a fire, their bright blankets a splash of color against the brown earth. Elena and the blacksmith's wife had organized the townsfolk. They brought tables and pies and a keg of cider. The blacksmith himself had brought his fiddle, and he played, his rough hand surprisingly gentle on the strings. They ate. The dine shared their roasted mutton and blue cornbread. The settlers shared their sourdough and apple pies. It was a strange, hesitant, beautiful mix. Keldon and May stood apart from the main gathering, watching. His shoulder had healed. The wound had left a puckered, angry scar, a reminder of the price. But the strength had returned to his arm. He wore a clean flannel shirt, and his hair, washed in the spring, was a fall of black silk down his back. May stood beside him, her hand resting in the crook of his good arm. She was not the woman in the wool suit. She was a woman of this land, her face browned by the sun, her hands strong. "He is a terrible musician," Keldon murmured. Listening to the blacksmith saw his way through a reel. "He is a wonderful blacksmith," May replied, smiling. "It is good. The sound is happy." They looked at the garden they had planted. It was asleep,
resting under a thin blanket of frost. The corn stalks were cut and bundled. The squash vines were withered, but they had dug the sweet, hard-shelled squash and had stored them for the winter. They had shelled the beans. The earth had kept its promise.
"It is strange,"
May said, her voice quiet.
"to be in the town, to be safe."
"It is not the town that is safe," he said. "It is you. You are not afraid."
"No," she said, looking at him. "I am not afraid."
They walked, their steps in time, leaving the sound of the fiddle and the laughter behind. They did not go toward the mesa. They walked back toward the dark, silent shape of La Estrella. The town was empty, everyone at the spring. The wind whispered down the main street, stirring the dust. They walked, not speaking, until they stood before the one building that held the worst of their memories, the old grain warehouse. The door was boarded up. The windows were dark. It was a tomb.
"This is the place,"
May whispered. Keldon pushed the loose plank door. It opened with a familiar, mournful squeal. They stepped inside. The darkness was the same. It smelled of rat droppings and old flour, but the scent of gunpowder was gone. A single shaft of moonlight, silver and clean, cut through a hole in the roof, illuminating the high stacks of flour sacks, still standing like pale ghosts.
"I was here,"
May said, her hand tightening on his arm. She pointed to the spot, right in that silver light. "This is where he grabbed me. And this is where you made your speech," Keldon finished for her, his voice soft. She looked at him.
"I was so frightened. Keldon, I have never, in my life, felt a fear like that. I thought I was going to die. I thought—"
"But you did not plead," he said. He stepped into the shaft of light, turning to face her. He took her other hand. "You did not beg. You fought. You told them the truth."
"It was the only thing I had left to say,"
she whispered, her eyes searching his face. "It was everything," he said. "It was you. You claimed your own body. You claimed your own life. You were not a victim. You were a warrior." She smiled, a small, shaky smile.
"And then my warrior fell from the sky."
"I was waiting for the right moment," he said, and she could see the rare, slow smile touch his own lips. They stood in that shaft of moonlight, hands linked, surrounded by the ghosts of their battle. The fear was gone. The memory was there, but it was no longer a wound. It was a scar, like the one on his shoulder. It was a part of their story, the thing that had forged them.
"I am not that woman anymore,"
May said.
"The one who was so afraid. You changed me."
"No," he said, his voice a low vibration. "I did not change you. This land changed you. The water changed you. You just became yourself." He raised his hand and touched her face, his rough thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "You are the strongest person I have ever known. May Sullivan." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "I am strong," she said, "because I am not alone. I am strong because you are standing with me." He stepped closer, his body blocking the moonlight. He was a warm, solid shadow in the cold. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers. The kiss was not like the first, frantic one in the warehouse. It was not a kiss of fear or desperation. It was slow. It was deep. It was a kiss of promise, of absolute certainty. It was a kiss that tasted of wood smoke and winter air and a future that was as solid as the rock beneath their feet. It was a kiss that sealed the bargain they had made in the dark, the promise of a shared life, a shared garden. When he pulled back, they were both breathing softly. He looked down at her, his dark eyes holding hers. "Not much longer now, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. She did not laugh this time. She did not blush. She met his gaze with a frank, open honesty that matched his own. "When I am ready," she said. her voice clear and sure.
And Keldon, I am ready.
The letter from the county arrived the next week. It was official, embossed with the seal of the territory. The Clear Spring Community Trust was legally established. The land was safe. Tucked inside was a second envelope, addressed to May. It was a land grant, signed by Judge Ferris himself. It gave her title to the 10 acres surrounding the schoolhouse, in perpetuity, for the purpose of education for all the children of the valley. She finally had a home, one that was not in Boston, one that she had earned. They were married on the first day of the new planting season. It was not a day, but a moment. Caught between winter and spring, they did not have a fancy ceremony. They stood by the spring on the newly tilled earth of their garden, which was waiting for the seed. Dinebiadi came and spoke, his voice rising in the old, beautiful Dine blessing way, asking for harmony, for beauty above them, beauty below them, beauty all around them. Then Elena, her face bright with tears, read a passage from her own worn Bible. The entire town was there. The blacksmith played his fiddle, and this time, his music was sweet. May wore a simple blue dress, the color of the spring. Keldon wore his finest woven blanket, the colors of the earth, over his shoulders. They did not exchange rings, they exchanged seeds. He gave her a perfect, dried kernel of blue corn. She gave him a packet of bean seeds from her home in the east. It was a promise of a shared harvest. That afternoon, Keldon took a group of children, Dine and settler alike, up into the canyons. It was the first meeting of the La Estrella volunteer scouts. He was not teaching them to fight. He was teaching them to see. He taught them how to read the clouds, how to find water, how to tell the track of a deer from the track of a wolf. He was teaching them how to belong to the land, so they would always know how to protect it. That night, for the first time in a very long time, the rain came. It was not a violent, angry storm. It was a soft, steady, soaking rain, the kind that sinks deep into the earth, that wakes up the seeds. May and Keldon stood under the small porch of the new adobe house they had built together. The walls were thick, the windows were wide, and for the first time, May felt the truth of the word home. They watched the rain fall, listening to the sound of it on the new tin roof. It was the sound of life. Keldon slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her arm wrapping around his back. His shoulder was healed. He was strong.
It is falling on our garden,
she whispered, her voice full of a quiet, profound joy.
The 3 sisters are drinking, he said. He could smell the rain, the wet earth, the clean, new scent of the world, the seeds they had planted that morning, the corn, the beans, the squash, were safe in the dark, wet ground. The rain fell, the world was washed clean, the drought was broken.
Tomorrow, Keldon said, his voice a low rumble against her ear.
The sprouts will come, the corn will rise, the world begins again.
May turned her face up to his. He looked down at her, his warrior's face softened by the dim light, by the promise of the rain.
Our tomorrow,
she said, finishing the thought,
is the water that flows forever.
He lowered his head and kissed her, a long, slow kiss that held the promise of the harvest, of the family, of the peace they had fought for. And as the rain fell around them, he lifted her into his arms and carried her, not as a prize, but as his partner, his equal, his wife, across the threshold and into the warm, dry, waiting darkness of their new home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am so grateful to have been able to share this tale with you. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Let us get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support the channel, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by even more folks. Thank you again, and may your trails be blessed.